No, we're not caught, are we? I'm not, I don't. We'll see if we're caught in a moment. Yes, Deputy Iyer.
Thank you very much, sir. I wondered if we were caught, but apparently we are. That's good. Sir, this is not the first time during this term of office that we've had a debate to bring back senators. And in the words of J.K. Galbraith, nothing is so admirable in politics as a short memory. But here we are again, discussing the possibility of going back in time to reintroduce senators, which has already been defeated twice by this very Assembly. One of the only differences about this debate to the previous ones is that there were meetings at all the parish halls to discuss the matter of senators with the public. What did we learn from this public engagement? One thing that was of note was the age of the attendees. At the events which I attended, there was nobody under the age of 50 there. And I believe this equates to the level of interest amongst young people about the idea of changing our electoral system. It is clearly not supported by our youth. And it must be mentioned that if senators were returned, the possibility of a young person being elected as senator would be virtually nil, due to many factors, but primarily the cost of running a senatorial campaign against what would be seasoned politicians. The most notable thing about those members of the public who did turn out was the vast variety of ways that they suggested for having senatorial elections. And most of them were nothing like the proposal that is being brought by Deputy Miller today. None of the attendees could agree on what format these elections should take. All of them wanted something different. Some wished to have senators being elected for 6 years. Others wanted all island senators to make up 37 members of the Assembly. Others wanted the senators to chair the old committee system. And indeed, some mentioned wanting the senatorial election to be on a different day, which was proposed by Deputy Tadyer. Others wanted the senators to be the chief minister and all other ministers. Another wanted 12 voting areas for each parish and separate senatorial elections. One wanted 18 senators instead of 9 senators. Another at St Peter's wanted 24 senators island-wide plus 12 constables, reducing dramatically the overall size of the Assembly. But of course, no government ever voluntarily reduces itself in size. These are just some of the permutations. And I mention this because when you ask the 20% of people who supported the reintroduction of senators, and we know this from the 2013 referendum, what they actually want, there is no real agreement about how they expect the system to work. And so even if this proposition is adopted, there will be a large number of that 20% who feel that they are not getting the senatorial election that they wished for. And this is a very important point, because the majority of those that want to see senators returned will be hugely disappointed, no matter what we decide today. With all these differences of opinion, you might think that there was a large amount of people turning out to these parish meetings, but of course that was not the case. In St John's, there were 8 members of the public, 14 in St Peter's, only 4 in St Saviour, with 8 state members in attendance. St Helier had 6 members of the public, with 9 state members accompanying them. And Grouville had 19 constituents turn out. I wonder why this might be that Grouville was so well attended in support of the senators. But then it occurred to me that in the general elections of 2008, again in 2014, and again in 2018, there were no elections for either deputy or for constable. And so the only vote that was available to Grouville residents was the senatorial election. And that seems to be the reason why the people of Grouville are so keen to bring back what was their only opportunity to cast a vote for the majority of the last 17 years. A major drawback of having 3 elections on the same day, which is totally undemocratic, and of course leads to lack of competition in all of the 3 elections. But those that will benefit most will certainly be the constables, because there will be even less reason to stand in a constable election when you have the choice of senatorial elections and deputies elections. But no matter how these senators are chosen, it will have no effect on the fact that each member will have one vote once they are sitting in this chamber. And of course, it will not affect the makeup of the Assembly, for the same people will be elected no matter which system is used. It also favours past members, for they will have a huge advantage purely because of their public profile, and so it will be questionable as to whether this will be a fair election. Indeed, why would current members stand for senator once they know who else is already declared for the position? It would be foolhardy for 10 sitting members to stand for 9 seats, which again emphasises the lack of competition that a senatorial election would create. There's one other major injustice about this proposition, and that is the removal of representation from St Helier. Our island capital would lose 3 deputies, compared to 1 deputy in St Bullards, St Clement and St Saviour, or for each of the other districts. And it seems inconceivable that any of the current St Helier deputies would support such a diminution of voter representation for the 36,000 residents of the island's most populous parish. One of the concerns I have heard voiced by members of the public is that Reform Jersey are gaining too much influence with a very small percentage of the overall vote. My response to that complaint is that rather than change the electoral system, we must encourage more people to stand in those areas that they currently have been successful in. As Plato said, one of the penalties for refusing to participate in politics is that you end up being governed by your inferiors. But, sir, I would not like to give the impression that I have an inbox teeming with comments about bringing back senators. I have received only 3 emails on the subject, and I will be interested to know from other members where there has been such a dearth of correspondence across the Assembly, and whether those tiny number of representations have in any way influenced their decision. The general public are fed up with the states discussing the electoral system over and over again. We are not doing ourselves any favours by continually regurgitating the same arguments time and time again. And so I ask members to vote against this proposition, and hopefully we will not be asked to discuss this matter again within this term of office. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Reneth.
Thank you, sir. We've had some interesting comments already in the amendments. It's been interesting, I think, to hear the desperation in advocates for the return of the senators. If we don't get it through this time, we never will. Well, sir, all I can say is that it is just as well the suffragettes didn't take this view. Perhaps they had a little more confidence in the strength of their arguments. This is my 3rd speech on this matter in less than 3 years, not counting all the amendments. And it is hard to find something to say something new, but I do think I found a new angle. And it was inspired by the meeting held in St Brillard by Deputy Miller. It was well attended compared to the other meetings, I think. We may have beaten Grouville, I think probably about 20 people there, not least because it was advertised on Channel the night before. So there were around 20 people in attendance, plus 5 states members. And of the people who spoke, I would say about 5 or 6 were in support of Deputy Miller's proposition, 2 spoke against, although I do admit that most of those who did not speak were probably also in Deputy Miller's camp. But the point I want to make is that it was fascinating hearing the arguments that were made, because they raised a really basic, fundamental question. What is the problem we are trying to solve? It certainly wasn't clear in the meeting that I attended. And the first thing I think to say is that there isn't a problem with our current electoral system fundamental problem that needs correcting. We have elected the most diverse and representative assembly in the island's history with an electoral system that is the fairest in the island's history. Who knows? Perhaps the two are related. We've moved forward, in other words. Still work to be done, to be sure, but we have made progress. So what problem does bringing back the senators solve? Did losing the senators create a democratic deficit? No, it did not. According to the most important way of judging these things, the fairness of representation, we have the most fairly elected assembly on record, and has been comprehensively proved during earlier debates on amendments introducing senators will reduce that equality. It makes things worse. What about the argument that gets thrown at me on social media sometimes? I never had a chance to vote for you because I don't live in your electoral district. Or, as I fear it is more normally expressed, I won't have the chance to kick you out. Well, assuming I stand for deputy again, those people still won't have a chance to vote for me or against me. You don't solve that problem by bringing back the senators, except for 9 members. That problem isn't solved. But what about the problem that the public don't get to have a say in choosing government ministers and the chief minister? Everyone in this assembly knows that there is nothing to stop a deputy becoming a minister, either in law or in practice. When senators were in the assembly, many deputies ably performed the role of minister. And what about chief minister? It is true that all chief ministers were, in the days of senators, a senator. But the public didn't choose the chief minister. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but the only person who won the senator election and became chief minister is sitting opposite me. The public don't choose the chief minister through the election. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe nobody was when the public vote. The public don't choose the chief minister through the election of senator, and for good reason. We are a parliamentary democracy, and the chief minister has to have the confidence of the assembly. But also, as an aside, I would say there's actually nothing to say a deputy couldn't be chief minister. And although it may sound unlikely, it is possible to imagine a situation, particularly if party politics becomes more deeply embedded, that a party leader, I'm not singling out any particular party here, could well choose to stand as a deputy in a safe seat and use the mandate their party gains as the basis for standing for chief minister. But I guess at that point we might have to change the system again. So what is the problem we should be trying to solve? Participation. Sir, we have the lowest participation of any advanced democratic country jurisdiction in the world. It is catastrophically poor. And who are the people who are not voting? Well, there are many groups, the young, ethnic minorities, the less well off. Why do they not vote? Well, we have the answer to that as well. They don't vote because they can't see the point. Nothing changes, or perhaps more precisely, nothing changes for the better. That is the reason people have given over and over again for giving up on our electoral system. There is absolutely no indication that the reason why people stay at home is because there are no senators. But I want more votes. I want to vote for more candidates. I agree that people do express this idea. And again, I reiterate that this is a minority view, passionately expressed by a small number of people. But it does not actually objectively improve our democratic system. Having a tiny influence on the election of a large number of candidates is not more democratic than having a greater influence on the election of a smaller number of people. And Deputy Taddier provided us with a useful example yesterday of why this is the case. So that problem doesn't get solved. So, will having senators solve the island's fundamental problems, the stuff the electorate really care about? Will senators be uniquely placed to help deal with the cost of living crisis? Will they add something extra in terms of solving the crisis in healthcare? Will senators help us build more homes? Will they be better placed to protect the environment? Sir, I find the idea singularly offensive. Every day this assembly sits, every single member is called upon to consider matters of an island-wide significance. What kind of ridiculous argument is it that says the senators will have some uniquely privileged ability to understand and represent the island interest? Have we ever suggested that the constables, who are explicitly here to represent parishes, are unable to fairly understand or represent island-wide issues? It is nonsense. Deputy Scott says the system was manipulated by political parties. Manipulation is a serious charge, and there was no evidence actually presented. It is noticeable that she singled out reform in her attack on party political manipulation. 2 other parties contested the election and seem to have been far less successful at manipulating the system that is supposedly biased in favour of parties. And so I would say this is dangerous territory into which people enter. It leads into territory where we end up designing a political system to achieve a political objective. Sorry, an electoral system to achieve a political objective. I have heard whispers of that in the background, but I've never heard such a brazen assertion of one of the reasons that might lie behind the return of the senators. It takes me back to my time on the Electoral Commission at a public meeting I attended, where a member of the public explained their opposition to changes in the system with the words, remembering that this was before the time of Reform Jersey, "I don't care about principles so long as we don't have any more Southerns." Sir, I'm sure that members supporting P2 will line up to say that this isn't the case, but I'm afraid I've heard too many versions of Deputy Scott's point of view to ignore it. It seems to me there is a political dimension to this proposition. It again reintroduces a bias against urban areas. It may be intentional, it may not, but in objective terms, it is a step backwards. I utterly reject the idea that we should be designing our electoral system to achieve a particular political outcome. I repeat the simple point that the current electoral system is, by objective measures, the fairest that this island has ever had. But it is worse than the fact that the return of the senators does not actually solve any fundamental issue. It makes several things worse. We shall be going back to a divided assembly. The whole point of the island-wide mandate is to confer greater legitimacy on the role of senator. It is a privileged position. It is designed to be a privileged position. And we heard from Deputy Ferry very eloquently about that. There'll be, I'm sure, when the senators return, we can be sure that when it comes to the roll calls, the senator will want to be before the deputies. Island-wide mandate, you see, a bit more important. Big state occasions, royal visits, who will be sitting in the front row seats, the senators. In all sorts of subtle ways, there will be signifiers that senators are more important. Deputy Ferry, as I say, made this elitism very clear. There are currently no members with a mandate to represent the island-wide interest, he said. So presumably once we have senators, that will be a good thing. We'll have got a higher quality, a higher status member. I would say that is wrong. We all have a mandate to represent the island-wide interest. That is our job. So in the future, will we hear speeches from the senators along the lines of, as a senator, I can speak with greater authority on this matter because I have an island-wide mandate? As deputies, are we supposed to defer to senators? Would I need to make a speech saying, I know I've considered this matter deeply, but obviously I can't have understood it as well as someone with an island-wide mandate? Of course not. But that is the subtle implication of this idea that those members elected to the role of senator have a special mandate. So we will also be making the electoral system more complicated. Now, supporters of returning the senators in St. Brillard, and I'm sure elsewhere, say, no, it doesn't. It's not complicated at all. So it is complicated. A three-tier assembly screams complexity. 3 different categories, all with different constituencies. So I'm not talking about long-term residents of the island. I'm talking about people who've not been here for so long, people who arrived to work as teachers and nurses, people who work in the finance industry, people who work in hospitality. A 3-tier assembly says to them, look, Jersey has its ways, locals understand it, it's your responsibility to come to terms with it. This is perhaps difficult territory, sir, but I'm here to say, no, our democratic system should not demand deep immersion to understand it. A person who has arrived in the last few years still needs decent housing. They still worry about healthcare. They still want a decent education for their children. They may not be hugely interested in our history. They may not want to invest time in understanding different electoral boundaries and so on. They're still contributing to this island. They still have the same rights, and we should be sending out the message loud and clear that the democratic system is designed for all of them. Reintroducing senators introduces subtle signifiers which say, if you want to vote, you should do it on particular terms. But what struck me in the end in St. Brillard was the impassioned argument of a woman who heard all the arguments picking apart the case for senators and in the end said, look, I don't care about those arguments, I just want to vote for senators. It was a powerful plea, but I'm afraid it exposes the emptiness of the argument for senators. The issue that we are trying to solve for the return of senators is the return of the senators. It is a solution to its own problem. It is an entirely self-reflexive issue. Sure, it solves the problem of those people who only deputies would like to be called senators, and it would satisfy the desire of a small group of people who feel passionately about this particular issue. I respect their views. They are passionately and deeply held, but they do not represent a majority. They do not represent the will of the people. There is not a single piece of evidence that there is a majority of Ireland supporting the island-wide mandate. And if we submit to this minority interest, it makes the architecture of our political system significantly worse. Our job in this assembly is to take the bigger picture, is to see the bigger picture, to see beyond a minority of passionately held views to the fundamental issues. This proposition does not address a fundamental issue. It does not correct a democratic deficit. It makes it worse. It won't make our assembly function better. It won't improve the standard of government. It creates divisions without purpose. It is the very definition of the wrong answer to the wrong question at the wrong time, and I shall be voting contra.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Taddeo.
Thank you, sir. There's a saying, I don't know where it came from, but it's something like this, that an animal is most ferocious when it's about to die. And what we're seeing here, it ties in with the very good speech that Deputy Renouf made. Before he goes, I would just like to congratulate him. It was a very intellectual speech. Indeed, it was far too intellectual for this assembly. It won't go down well with this assembly, unfortunately. And I think this, I'm tempted at this point to ask members to put their lights on if they're still undecided on this vote, just to know if there's any point in having this, in me making this pitch here today. And he said in concluding that it's the wrong answer to the wrong question. And of course, the point is what we used to call establishment back in 2008, the establishment candidates, the establishment who control this island ultimately and who wish to remain in power through non-democratic means, or rather as least democratic means as possible, so that they don't have to knock doors, so that they don't have to face any real scrutiny, so that they don't have to do the casework that the constables and the deputies and the constituencies will have to do. They want to be able to carry on making the decisions that they make, preferably behind closed doors and with the right kind of people, and not have to worry about undesirable types that might find their way into the Assembly, let alone into the Council of Ministers. That's the political reality, and it's a shame because I thought we'd made such progress since the 2008 election. But no, this is very much a pitch we're seeing from Deputy Miller, a pitch not for the new. It's not a pitch to try and get new people involved in politics, to try and solve somehow the democratic deficit that we've so painfully obviously got in the island, which we all know too well. But it's actually a pitch to old Jersey, as the senatorial elections always were. And the underlying tone that we're getting here, we've already had it, is that we don't like outsiders. We don't like people coming over here telling us what to do. Anybody who puts forward a system which is supposed to be fair is some kind of political extremist, a theorist, a purist, an academic, a couch, what's the word? Somebody who's just a pundit, perhaps, who's purporting and pronouncing things for our system. But actually, what they're saying is we want things to stay the same. In fact, not even stay the same. We want things to go back to the way they were. Because the answer, of course, that they all know is party politics. Because that's what politics is. It's party politics. Saying that a party in Jersey might be seeking to benefit from the system is a bit like saying that having teams in netball or in football actually distort the the game outcomes of that particular sport. No, netball, football, they're all inherently team sports. And it's much more fundamental, of course, when it comes to democracy, because the fundamental point of why people have this affinity for senators, and there's probably more than one reason, is because they want to influence the direction of political travel. They want to have a say in the makeup of the next government, which they can't do in a system which is largely made up of independent politicians. And I was really disappointed on a number of counts with Deputy Ferry's speech, which is why I put my light on straight away. I should have probably held back, actually, because it's not helpful necessarily to hear from 3 or 4 members coming from the same direction. The first point I'm disappointed with is that he stood up and said a number of untruths, because it's actually factually incorrect. He said this makes our system fairer.
Well, you say untruths. Do you mean something else? Suggesting that he was not telling the truth?
Yes, sir, I do mean that, and this is where it gets into difficulty. He said something which is not, the facts don't back up, so I'm not saying that he lied, sir. Well, I'm just saying that he said something which is factually incorrect. And I've got my George Orwell quotes ready, but I'm ready to take that back.
All right, that's
I won't say that he spoke an untruth, sir, if that's unparliamentary. What I will say is that he seemed to misrepresent facts in a way which he may not have done consciously, because actually we know that this system, the statistics which are demonstrable, and this is the fundamental point, is that fairness and unfairness of equity of vote, as I think has been said in previous parts of this wider debate, are not subjective. You can't say this is fair. You might point to certain things which are desirable, like for the number of votes, for example, that somebody has. But when it comes to actually the power of the vote, the weight of the vote, the distribution of the seats and the representation that different parts of our island get, those are all statistically set in stone. And the fact is, and this might then lead some members outside of the Assembly to question motives of those who want to change things, although we don't do that, of course, is that you look at which districts are most affected. And of course, we look at the districts such as St. John, St. Lawrence and Trinity, which even under the current system are 23% overrepresented. At whose expense? Well, largely at St. Helier, but not exclusively. And what we do, rather than trying to address that inequality, saying, well, how do we make sure that other parts of the island are better represented, we actually make the distribution worse. So we go to a point where they actually have 29% distortion, overrepresentation by 29%. And then we look at the districts of St. Mary's, St. Warren and St. Peter. Where are all the supporters coming from who want to bring back senators? It seems to be, up until now, we wait for the final vote, from those districts. So not only do they want to bring back an island-wide mandate, but they actually will be benefiting those districts too. So you see St. Mary's, St. Warren and St. Peter going from 30% overrepresentation. That's already terrible. A deviation of 10% should be worrying us. It's 30% currently. What does this new system do? It makes the distribution in those areas 37% overrepresented. So it's not a fairer system, and we're in a difficult position to know what it means when a member stands up and says, this makes the system fairer, and the facts don't back that up. What is one supposed to conclude about the motives of the member? It's not that they're necessarily pernicious, sir, but it's the fact that that member is certainly misleading the public if he maintains that in spite of the black and white facts. I suppose, you know, I bumped into somebody on the way, a former politician, and he said, good luck this afternoon, vote the right way. I don't think I'll be voting the right way from his perspective. And I said, but I've got to go because I'm just reading quotes from 1984 to prepare for my speech. And what did Orwell say? He said, ultimately, you know, the freedom is about the truth to say 2 + 2 = 4. And when we have states members standing up and suggesting that maybe in good faith that 2 + 2 = 5 or 2 + 2 = 3 for a different district, that is not what endears us, I don't think, to the wider electorate. I'm also disappointed because ultimately Deputy Ferry knows the answer to the question that we're all asking as well. It's party politics. Irrespective of which seats you have, you know who your leader is going to be because it's the leader of the biggest party, or you have a coalition that works out a deal afterwards and you vote according to that principle. That's why Deputy Ferry presumably joined a political party, and they have 2 members elected. And it is, I take no pleasure in saying this, but it's disappointing when that party effectively renders itself completely meaningless during this debate because they're voting in 2 different ways. It's only got 2 members. They're going to vote on different ways on something so fundamental as electoral reform. as the island-wide mandate and as a fair system. They can't agree on what a fair system is. And I'm more inclined to be interested to hear what Deputy Balash, a former member of the Electoral Commission, who used some of those first principles of equity, fairness, distribution of seats, also voting systems, those need to be brought into the mix. I'd like to hear more about that, because I think that part of the Liberal Conservative Party may have more edifying things to say about how we might wish to vote ultimately in this debate. The public will come back to us and say, why do you keep changing it? Young people, again, we'll go back to that point. We've had two arguments put forward from the Constable of St Helier and then from Deputy Gorse, which I want to address. So the best arguments they can put forward is that, on the one hand, the Constable of St Helier, as I heard it, says, I went to a bar in St Helier on St Patrick's Day. I spoke to a number of people who were half cut, and they told me that they wanted to bring back the island-wide mandate, sir. And then we hear from, so that's a good basis for making your decision, isn't it? I gave up taking advice from people in bars quite a long time ago. I prefer to maybe go to dinner parties which don't necessarily have alcohol, when somebody would come up to me and says, have you read that book called The Triumph of the Country by Advocate John Kelleher? It's a jolly good book. And I'll say, well, I know of it, and I've certainly read extracts of it. And isn't the gist of it something like this, that the countryside in Jersey has always dominated at the expense of the town and the urban areas, and that's been the problem, and that actually over time, even in 1948, that when electoral reform was being done, that they didn't really do it properly. There was always a fudge there. And of course, the reason that the senators were put in the first place is not because it was a great idea, but it was to solve a particular problem. And the particular problem it was solving was actually having members of the court sitting in your assembly, members who were, I think, effectively elected for life or for a very long time, and who were the public didn't have a say over, and it flies in the face of the separation of powers. That's the reason that the senators were brought in. Unfortunately, they got stuck, and I don't think they were meant to be here for that long. I think it was just a problem because at the time there was the programme that was being filmed in Jersey. The documentary was, of course, called The Great Jersey Fudge. Unfortunately, that film never got made because it would have put Jersey on the map. But as I said earlier, I think that the new film that needs to be made now is The Great Jersey Gerrymander, and it could perhaps feature Deputy Miller as the lead role in that proposition. Why do I say that it appeals to old Jersey and to negativity? Because when she addressed the issue about the democratic deficit in Jersey and the fact that we have low voter turnouts, rather than actually come up with positive ideas as to how we might solve that, she said that actually, why don't we just, or she hinted at this, what if we just actually said that non-British people can't vote in the first place, and that would reduce the number of people who can vote. They probably don't vote anyway, and that might make us look like we have higher turnouts. Well, why stop there? I'm sure there are lots of people in Jersey, certainly if you listen to the comments on Facebook, who would say, actually, you should only be able to vote if you're Jersey born. There are probably those who say you should only be able to vote if you're a man, or if you're a property owner, or if you're of a certain intellect, or if you're over 50 years old because you haven't got the life experience. And there are those who would say, actually, you shouldn't be able to stand for election in Jersey if you're not born in Jersey, because I'm sure that there are those xenophobes and those bigots out there who would agree with that. Of course, that would put the deputy in a very difficult position because she herself wouldn't be able to stand for election. And of course, nationality shouldn't be a bar, I don't think, to either being able to vote or to sit in this assembly. But those are the very reactionary policies that we get when we scratch the surface. And that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing ultimately with progress or with regress, with reaction, or actually going forward and having a system which is fit for purpose in this day and age. And who will actually the winners and losers of this be? It'll be the public of Jersey, sir. Because if you're well-heeled, you're well-known, you wear a nice suit, you manage to court the JEP and they give you an article every week in the newspaper, and we can see them actually lining up the candidates, or the candidates lining themselves up in the JEP to come in and to stand for election, because they don't want to be wasting their time as a humble deputy or a parish constable. They don't want to be dealing with matters about roads and pavements and the width of the pavement and the fact that you're pushing a pavement along a pram and the road is, the pavement is too small. I'm going to send that email later, Constable. It happened at lunchtime. They want to be dealing with the real issues, and they want to be leading from the front in that sense, sir. And it will also be fine for political parties, because if you have a political party, you've got the wherewithal to field a slate of candidates, to pay for your election material, and to have teams knocking on the doors. So who does it not benefit? It doesn't benefit the new members. A text message is being sent. I thought that meant time out, sir. Sir, who does it benefit ultimately? New members, new candidates will find it very difficult to get elected. The pre-existing candidates, deputies, members who are seeking re-election will ultimately be re-elected. And as somebody pointed out at one of the meetings, the same old faces get re-elected anyway, it just with less accountability, with less contact with the public that they represent, sir. So let's not be under any illusion about where this is going. I'm sorry if members feel that this has taken a dive in the tone, sir, but I do feel that actually we're going back a number of decades with the direction of travel. Perhaps somebody would like to make a more positive speech as to why we should also not go back to Senator, sir, but certainly this is the way I see it. This is the way I have to call it.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Sir, people with aligned interests are not evenly spread in any particular constituency or parish. Their interests overlap and diverge at times. When voting, they need and they should have the right to decide their priorities. And in doing so, they may reasonably not wish to have political choices removed from them. It is fundamentally unfair if one group in our community is exponentially represented in this state's assembly more than another. They currently are. The maths does not lie. And they will continue to be if we continue with the current arrangements unamended. Nothing will change that. The important disadvantages highlighted in the report to the Electoral Commission have been flagged by me during this debate at least, and I am glad of that. Because some independents may not have been aware of them when assuming certain positions when constructing their manifestos. And I believe the words in the 2000 report produced by the University of Reading for the benefit of the Electoral Commission are worth repeating. Maybe members of the press may even pick up on them. Under the current arrangements, where groups of voters in particular areas support, for example, a political party, that political party can secure a numerical advantage that makes their representation disproportionate, even if most voters had no opportunity to vote for their candidates. And guess what, sir? That's exactly what happened. 20% of this assembly are members of a single political party, and we cannot say 20% of voters island-wide put them there, because the whole of the electorate did not have the opportunity to vote for them. And I remain of the position that I think it's a shame that they themselves have been deprived of an opportunity to seek an endorsement by island-wide. Multi-member plurality, according to this report, can lead to a large number of wasted votes. And I repeat, it said, and this is an effect that is likely to depress electoral turnout. And guess what? It did. And I remain perplexed that by the recent proposition brought by the PPC supposedly to improve electoral turnout when this was still there in that report. But that's a debate we can leave to another day. I maintain my position that the PPC and the States Assembly went the wrong way about things in allowing the current disclosure arrangements and highlighting the risks, something that we actually are insisting that government does now. State members know, in order to achieve equity in as many ways as possible, I have been exploring consequences of possible proposed fractional voting for the constables and how they can be contained. And I thank members for feedback they have given in the debate so far. Current objections may be overcome with relatively simple adjustments to the basic premise, and I also have perfect confidence in the GREF's ability to acquire the correct software to do swift calculations in the States Chamber, if that's the way we go. Super constituencies, as currently constituted, without any form of island-wide representation, is not providing an answer to these important disadvantages, these important distortions, and the Fairness Commission doesn't even deal with them, but they are there. Deputy Ayer's analysis of how many votes were cast for senators overlooks the fragrant matter that voters have lost the ability to influence, through the exercise of their vote, a greater proportion of the choice of members who sit in the States Assembly than they have right now. So just because the inequities aren't currently addressed by the rules of the Fairness Commission does not mean that the rules that were adopted by the former States Assembly should not have been adapted in some way to address the disadvantages highlighted by the report to the Electoral Commission. So whether or not this proposition is passed, there is some cleaning up to do. If it isn't, I expect current political parties to go hell for leather to exploit the advantage the current arrangements give them, which are not totally democratic, despite the lack of express mention in the Fairness Commission rules, as the report to the Electoral Commission highlighted. And members of the former PPC seem to have gone hell for leather to push through and promote the current arrangements, focusing the minds of states and members and the public on complex calculations based on the Fairness Commission, glossing over the structural disadvantages of a super constituency structure to independent members and voters island-wide. Deputy Barash, now a leader of the Jersey Liberal Party, and my fellow St Brelard Deputy Renniff were members of that Electoral Commission, and they seem to have glossed over these disadvantages in their speeches too, despite their more direct knowledge of them. Deputy Renniff has suggested there has been no democratic deficit resulting from the current arrangements, and I suggest he may be being blinkered on the matter, which could be a first for him, and also does not understand, or hasn't actually pinpointed that reform used the tactics highlighted in the report, as it was its entitlement, because that was allowed. And other political parties did not, because they perhaps weren't so clever, I don't know. As for suggestions of elitism and consequences, I believe the deputy has been referring to certain matters of standing orders that can be changed within the term of this state's assembly. And I'm happy to support a proposition that removes that sort of elitism when the sole current justification for calling those elected island-wide states members senators in this proposition appears to be to distinguish them from those who aren't. So maybe these two deputies have their own solutions to the important disadvantages if they to independent candidates and the electorate that were mentioned in that report. Maybe they plan to bring proposals forward if elected in the next election. They haven't produced much in the way of them during this term. The question remains what is fair and in the public's interest, rather than what suits self-interest. Now, in the case of the constables, if they support the continuation of one vote per constable, they could be accused of doing so out of self-interest, but they also could be accused, if they did actually go the other way, of not acting in the interests of their parishioners. So I totally understand why Reform members and their supporters might energetically argue in favour of an uninterrupted continuation of the current system. They have the most to lose from this. I feel that Deputy Mezek, the leader of the Reform Party, was clutching at straws in his speech, having criticised Deputy Miller for referring to flimsy evidence. And he supported this by selectively quoting comments posted on social media. I don't even know the source of them. What, was this on a Reform Facebook page? And the irony, sir, the irony in referring to the choice of the electorate in the 2013 referendum, that referendum took away choices from the electorate. No choice to choose a two-member States Assembly of senators and constables. No choice to have fractional voting in the States Assembly or a single transferable voting system to address the patent inequities of some of the proposals that nevertheless were put on the table in that referendum. I do believe the Deputy himself suggested he thought the fairest system was one with just senators and no constables. But the fact is, the electorate confirmed their desire for constables to continue in the States Assembly not once, but twice. And the second referendum gave the electorate a clear binary choice on the matter. Sir, I may not be perfect, as the editor of the JP has sought to remind me, but I'm pretty good at blowing smoke out of people's eyes. Might not the Deputy put it this way, as one reformer did to me? If the rules currently determining the composition of the States Assembly is skewed in favour of the constables, to the point that Reform members occasionally describe the constables as a political party, why not have arrangements skewed in their favour too? That could justify a failure to support islanders having a greater say in who governs them. And if there is one thing that unites the former Chief Minister and the current Chief Minister, both of their political careers have been impacted by political party kingmakers given power by the current rules. So what are the principles members should be applying in considering this proposition? Our Code of Conduct states we must put public interest before private interest. Now, I understand why some people would take the positions they do. And I respect the desire expressed by Deputy Ayer to represent the interests of his constituents. So he should. However, he might consider there is a bigger picture here. He is suggesting the solution is for more people to challenge a political party on its own turf. I doubt he will be. And I suggest any aspiring independent candidates do not ask him to be their political advisor, given what happened to candidates of political parties who did. Skewed electoral arrangements may produce more diversity, but if a political party benefits from them being skewed and they weren't disclosed, why are we not actually putting things right? During a debate of the government plan last year, Deputy Tadier berated the government for not clearly disclosing information about the ramification of what he called sneaky non-disclosure. Hence, and he actually and he whipped up allies in the States Assembly into a state of indignation to vote for his proposition, arts and heritage funding, protesting this is not the way things should be done. But I would like to thank the Deputy for an insight into his complex principles of morality. The bringing forward of P.139 2020 was not the way things should have been done.
Deputy Scott, I hesitate to interrupt you, but I don't think it's appropriate to refer to people's standards of morality during the
Thank you, sir. Sorry, I apologise to the Deputy, because I actually do believe at heart he is a moral person, actually. And anyway, while caught in all these machinations, the independents in this Assembly are being squeezed out by the current arrangements, and they will continue to be unless they are improved for the better. If there are communities with shared values spread island-wide right now, which we know that there are, we need an element of island-wide representation. Deputy Renouf, in referring to a lack of evidence for the support of senators, has overlooked that the final report of the Electoral Commission did refer to 52% of those making submissions to the Commission wanted to retain members elected on an island-wide basis. And I believe many islanders remain flabbergasted and disbelieving that the island-wide mandate was abolished. Does my constituency support the support of political parties, let alone a system that gives them disproportionate representation? The evidence isn't flimsy. Despite the re-election of my fellow St Brelard Deputy Tadier, Reform fielded 2 candidates in the district. They canvassed as a team. One of them wasn't elected. So that brings into question that whether there really is that support. And candidates representing the Jersey Liberal Conservatives and the Progress Party bit the dust. So Deputy Tadier is an outlier. And why? Because many of my constituents simply like him. And why shouldn't they? No independent who believes their voters prefer a system that supports independence should be continuing to support the current skewed system. This proposition could be regarded as a stepping stone out of the murky pond into which the States Assembly and the electorate has been plunged, a pond of allowable political manipulation that has never been demonstrably supported by my constituents. I urge other members, at least those who have stood as independent candidates, to support the proposition. It's the only way to support the imbalance. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the main proposition? No other member wishes to speak. Deputy Kovac.
Thank you, sir. I believe in the importance of fairness, inclusivity, and practicality when it comes to structuring our democratic representation. I believe this proposal, although perhaps well-intentioned, does not serve the best interests of our society. Some may wrongly believe that they would have a say in the makeup of the Council of Ministers or even the Chief Minister. However, I am not aware of any parliament where ministerial roles are elected directly through the public election, and I'm glad that Deputy Moore's related amendment didn't pass. The Assembly should definitely have a say on who they see fit in the Council of Ministers and on what department, based on expertise or knowledge in the field, not just on good intentions that made someone popular enough to be elected, but who might not have neither any leadership skills or a clue about the subject matter. First, let's consider what senators are expected to do. The public may have a pleasant but misguided view of what the role entails. Many believe that by introducing senators, we will somehow have a more efficient and representative government. But this is not the case in the long run. Adding senators will not necessarily improve the quality of our representation or the effectiveness of the Assembly. What we to do would be to decrease the diversity of representation, and I'll explain why. The financial and time commitments required for an island-wide campaign are not something everyone can easily afford, especially as independents who lack the support of a political party. We know that some people, especially those with parental responsibilities for young children, face significant challenges when it comes to finding the time and money to run a proper campaign in order to have fair chances. There are members between us that are in this situation. I have small children, and I understand the balancing act that comes with being a working parent. I personally would struggle, if not unable, to afford the time or resources needed to run for election on an island-wide scale without significant support. This is not about the title or the glamour of being a senator. It's about the practicality and reality of the situation. I know the work I do here, and I do it with passion and dedication. I work not just for my own constituency, but for island-wide issues, and I have never rejected to help anyone, no matter what parish they live in. In addition to improving roads, traffic, safety, and well-being in San Xavier, I have worked on many other issues that concern the entire island. I disagree with what some state members have stated, that by not having island-wide elected members, we don't efficiently address island-wide issues for the public, and that someone elected island-wide would do it better. I'm sorry to say to everyone who supports this narrative, especially if they are part of the Council of Ministers. If they don't already consider island-wide matters in their roles, they are not doing their job properly. I remind them that almost all the propositions brought for debate in this assembly are for the island-wide interest and not just for districts. Just to give some examples in the senators' context, should we say that the hospital or cost of living should be worked on just by senators, or should be a joined-up approach for the whole assembly? Then how can we say senators would address island-wide matters as the rest can do it efficiently enough? I ask you to consider people like me, low to mid-class women, migrants, busy parents of young children who often feel disconnected from the political process. These are the people who would be underrepresented in an island-wide election, not because they are unworthy or incapable, but because they simply do not have the same resources or opportunities to run in such a broad and competitive environment on their own. If you check the declared expenses in the last few senatorial elections, all the successful candidates have spent between $10,000 and $20,000. How could people like me ever afford to spend such an amount when this could easily be a deposit to your own flat, which I don't even own? Does that make people like me less worthy to represent island-wide residents? But wait, I already do that as a deputy. If we want to make the role of senator an elitist aspiration, where only the wealthy or those without heavy familiar responsibilities can succeed, then this is the direction we are heading in, and how is this representative of the makeup of the island? For the members that made it repeatedly obvious in their speeches that the support for the proposition is in the hope that would disadvantage Reform Jersey candidates, I would tell them that having the support of party resources, I truly believe running for senators would give actually an advantage to a Reform Jersey candidate. Right. I have never opposed helping people from all parishes or walks of life, regardless of where they live, and I'm sure many other states members feel the same. However, I do believe we must consider how an island-wide election would affect diversity in our representation. If we create a system where only those with the means to run island-wide can do so, we risk losing the lived experiences that make for a truly representative assembly. And as we have seen in other places like Guernsey, when all island elections were implemented, the result was a decrease in diversity and a disconnect between elected officials and the everyday concerns of ordinary people. If the argument is that senators, if introduced, will focus only on island-wide issues, while deputies continue to focus on both constituency and island-wide matters, as we currently do, where is the fairness in work responsibilities? Apart from being elected island-wide, the previous senators had nothing different in their responsibilities or the way they functioned compared to deputies. They didn't even have their own separate committee or role, only a different title. So it's only natural to ask, what is the point of introducing senators in a unicameral parliamentary setting other than changing the title? If that's all we're looking for, why not just change the deputy title to senator and be done with it? I personally don't care what title we use. The reality is that the current system we have with constituencies and deputies representing our local interest works. It gives each constituency a voice and ensures that votes have fair and equal weight. I must remind everyone of the referendum on the state's reform, where the public decided to remove the senators. Let's not make the mistake of reversing that decision now and overcomplicate the electoral system again, against the recommendation of election observers. Deputy Miller stated in her speech to Deputy Tadier's amendment that the public overwhelmingly wants senators back. I don't deny that a smaller portion of the public may feel that way, but the referendum result from 2013, where about 80% of voters chose to remove the senators, contradicts the idea of widespread support for bringing them back. Additionally, the very low turnout at the public meetings held by the deputy, ranging from 3 to 25 attendees, does not support the claim of overwhelming public interest, especially since these meetings were held outside of most working hours. We have all seen how much higher the turnout is when there is overwhelming interest on a subject, and that certainly wasn't the case here. I also think that about 70 signatures from 2 parishes don't validate the argument when compared to the about 80% referendum results to remove senators. 2 electoral commissions, both of which included prominent and well-respected Jersey people, were on it, from which 2 members are present in this assembly. And we heard from one of them, Deputy Renouf, accurately addressing the issue in his speech. The 2012-2013 Electoral Commission was entirely local, and all agreed with removing island-wide mandate. I ask you to think carefully about this. We are not talking about eliminating the possibility for anyone to represent island-wide issues. We already do that. We are talking about the fairness of the system. If we want to ensure that every voice, regardless of background or resources, has the opportunity to be heard in this assembly, we must not create a system that favors only those who can afford to run island-wide campaigns and creates unfairness in responsibilities for basically the same role. We shouldn't revert to a more complicated electoral system with no evidence of improved efficiency when we haven't even given the new system a proper chance, especially considering that it hasn't even completed a full term yet. Moreover, this new electoral system has brought us the most diverse assembly in Jersey's history. In conclusion, unless you want this diversity reversed, let us not be swayed by the illusion of a more glamorous title or the idea that having senators will automatically make us more efficient. What we need is a system that is fair, practical, and representative of all people, not just those who can afford to run a high-cost campaign. Let's reject this proposal and instead focus on making sure that all of our elected members, regardless of their title or method of election, are truly representative of the diverse and hardworking people of this island, especially since we are all already addressing island-wide matters on a daily basis. Thank you.
Deputy Porre.
Thank you, sir. Well, my speech is going to be very short, but nevertheless, I do need to raise my voice to this issue. It is very clear to me that today some Jersey politicians are very intended to vote for something that will make our electoral system considerably less fair and more complicated than it is now. And I ask that question, why? It has been stated in previous debates and amendments that there was a referendum with this particular proposition. And again, I will mention that the vote was 80% against senator. And I cannot help to think who is really going to benefit from a reintroduction of senators? The public or the certain members of this assembly? Presently, the island is dealing with challenging and major issues such as the housing crisis, healthcare crisis, and cost of living crisis, just to name but a few. And as a St. Helier South deputy, I do experience a great deal of calls for support from our constituents on our surgeries over those issues. I never supported a deputy a member of the public who wanted senators to be reinstated in my nearly 3 years as a deputy. And I do speak to every person in the island who is happy to talk to me about their issues. Constituency surgeries are settling onto a steady pattern and gaining popularity. Constituents are free to access us on a regular basis. This is an important work we offer, and the general public enjoys and benefits from the opportunity to have access to politicians over their personal issues. For us, states members, constituency surgery are also highly beneficial because it keeps us on top of the island current issues that are directly affecting our own communities. To bring senators back, that would also mean that fewer members would be available to address constituents' concerns, as senators historically are viewed by constituents to being concerned with much wider issues than localized ones. So for all the reasons many members spoke against the proposition, I would not be willing to support to reinstate senators when it can potentially, for all the reasons I explained before and other members before me, also create more confusion to the voter, particularly when Jersey faces voting apathy and political alienation from the wider electorate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I hope you can hear me. And
We can, yes, Deputy.
Thank you, sir. And I'm so proud to be associated with the last two speakers who have expressed themselves so well in their first term in this assembly, and what an impact they've made. And where did their presence in this assembly come from? From a fairer and more equitable voting system, which gave opportunity. Now, sir, very early on in my political career, a very experienced member of this assembly said to me, and it was Deputy Southern who said to me, he may have even said, listen, son, when they go low, you go high. Now, I've not always achieved that, I think, and then I get told off by the said deputy. But that's exactly what I'm going to do today, because we need to raise this debate from some of the previous speeches. And I've got to say to every single Reform voter out there, if you've not turned out to the polls yet, listen to what's being said about what your beliefs and your political future. And let's make sure we do turn out in our droves in the next election. But anyway, so I want to talk about what island-wide means and island-wide decisions. So I've been a deputy, I've never been a senator. I am a minister at the moment. People can make their own judgments on that. I know some would say I should not be that, perhaps. But I have a lot of experience in the area that I am a minister for, and I feel that it is relevant. But also, sir, in my time in the Assembly, I've made decisions on huge numbers of island-wide issues. I vote on the island plan. I brought amendments to the island plan. We vote on numerous government plans and budgets. During the time of Brexit, we voted on a number of significant things, well, not just island-wide, but UK and Europe-wide effects on our island. I was in the Assembly during COVID as a deputy, and we voted on a significant number of pieces of legislation around COVID, things that we would never have wanted to vote on. They weren't local, simple constituency issues. And indeed, sir, there's no such thing as a simple constituency issues, because I don't consider my constituents as simple. I see them as important members of our community, people who work hard every single day for our island. And so I voted on all sorts of other areas. Every single buses, sir. I was told in the last sitting of the Assembly I was obsessed with buses. But actually, sir, we have been successful in this Assembly so that every single child on the island of 18 and under can buy a bus and a bus pass and access them. That's not one constituency issue, that's the entire island. I have voted on funding issues across this Assembly. We voted on the new hospital. We voted on so many things that are island-wide that it is impossible to say that senators will have a significantly different role. And I would like the bringer of the proposition to explain in detail how they would have a wider view of island-wide policies, because I simply do not understand that. Subsequently, the creation of another level of member makes no sense whatsoever. And in terms of our electoral system at the moment, there is a simple way if you're worried about the growth of reform, and we haven't stopped growing yet, we're still going, we're on our pathway upwards for the right reasons, and that is to either form a party or make sure that you stand in the right place, come up with a valid manifesto, valid ideas that members on the doorstep, constituents on the doorstep will agree with. We've done that. We do the groundwork. We do it all of the time. And I urge all members of this Assembly to do exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing, because that's the way you get people to vote. And the notion that young people, I do get a subliminal notion that really if young people aren't voting, that's not as important as we think. It is vital that we get young people voting into the future. And just adding another type of states member will not do that. And so I'll say one more thing about Reform Jersey because so much has been said. I will add as well that the numbers that turned up for the road shows, they are significant. I think the last Pint and Politics that we had, which is a reform-led event, we get people in to discuss 6, we had about 30 odd people. So that's quite a good turnout compared to the road shows. We need to do more of those. But so I finished with a quote, something that people may have seen. And it's this, I think Sam Mesick and his Reform colleagues have changed the course of the political narrative on this island for better, giving voice to the real concerns of real people and making traditionally property-focused assembly see a lack of fairness, compassion for the less well-off and empathy is detrimental to the cohesion, health and future of this great island. I finished with that positive quote, sir. And if I'll tell you where it's from, sir. It was from the 15th of February, and it was from the editor of the Jersey Evening Post. What a lovely endorsement that is. Sir, we do not need to change where we are. We need to run through this again, and we need to get more people involved. I finish, actually, sir, I'm going to finish with one thing because I want to say it. I am incredibly proud that I am in a party that is of equal men, equal women. The first Romanian member of this assembly, the first Portuguese member of this assembly, the first black member of this assembly, and we really embrace diversity. If we make changes that change that diversity, that is a step backwards, and I reject that, and I urge members to think extremely careful about the decision they're going to make today. Thank you, sir.
So, apologies. I just want to apologise to the Assembly, but I have to leave because I have a parent teacher event that I have to go to at 4 o'clock, so I have to leave soon. So I apologise to everybody.
Very well. That's of course a matter for you. Constable Martin.
Thank you, sir. I hold the role of senators in great affection, and of course I would. My beloved father was a successful, hard-working senator for many years, and my brother served well as a senator for 6 years. I have had the privilege and the pleasure of working in this assembly for 7 years, and the past 4 years in the most diverse assembly in Jersey's history. And even after a gruelling morning like this morning, it is still a privilege and a pleasure to work with this assembly. I really do appreciate that some islanders feel that they are disenfranchised by not having an island-wide vote. I also really appreciate that the reintroduction may be at the expense of this diverse assembly. However, as chair of PPC, who will be charged with bringing this forward, and to show no bias, I will be abstaining. Thank you.
Very much. Constable St John.
Thank you, sir. So I think I was possibly the only member to switch my light on when Deputy Tadya asked if anybody was undecided, sir. So I've listened very closely to the remarks of all the members throughout this debate. So I attended the parish meeting that Deputy Miller held in St John so that I could listen to the views of St John's parishioners. Sir, St John's is normally very engaged, sir, but just to clarify, Deputy Ayer, there were actually 21 people at the St John meeting, 8 parishioners, 5 other members of the public. We also had 7 states members and also a member of staff from the Gref. So when the Council of Ministers did its roadshow in St John's, we had twice that amount of people came up to see the Council of Ministers, sir. In addition, I've had numerous conversations with individual parishioners where they've expressed their views on senators. I'm hearing a consistent message about senators. Unfortunately, the vast majority of people sharing that message come from one demographic. The older members of our community are far more in favour in general, although I have to be very careful, sir, not to include Mrs. J in that category. So I should make it clear that I wholeheartedly respect the views of these people. One of the arguments at the St John meeting was that the senatorial elections attracted better quality of candidates. Well, sir, having attended that meeting with the intention of just listening, I couldn't keep quiet any longer. So we've had candidates who couldn't get 1,000 votes across the island. Yes, sir, a senatorial candidate with less votes than a constable from a small parish like St John. So in 2011, 6 of the 13 candidates couldn't muster 3,000 votes each. And as I reminded the meeting, I can still remember the cardboard cutout taking its place at a hustings on a senatorial platform. So I'm of course cognizant of my position in the 2013 and 14 referendums. Now as then, there are a variety of views and arguments that one has to balance. Like all members, sir, I take these matters very seriously, and I can say that this is the only debate, other than the Bridging Island plan, that has caused me to actually lose sleep. Whilst respecting any member who chooses to abstain, and of course the chair of PPC, I fully respect that, I do think we have to make decisions, however difficult they may be. We shouldn't change any part of our constitution without proper thought. I think it's fair to say that this is an issue which has had its fair share of consideration and airtime. Sir, I have heard the public's clear views on senators, both on the doorstep during the last election and in the build-up to this debate. Sir, on those doorsteps, I certainly didn't promise to bring a proposition to return the role of senator. I have never been opposed to the principle of the island-wide mandate and have always made this clear. I have said publicly and will repeat again, I would support a move to a Guernsey-type system with perhaps 30 or 36 senators and 12 constables. Sir, one particular comment over recent days has resonated with me, sir. It was that the public have never been given the opportunity to support a reformed electoral system that actually included senators. They've never had a referendum on the senators, and in 2013 the only option for keeping senators was to maintain the status quo. I thought it was a fair point, sir, and it's given me serious cause for reflection. I can see the arguments for not wanting to return to 3 classes of member, and I can see the arguments in favour. We all wanted turnout to go up in 2022, but unfortunately it went down. Sir, we are all elected as leaders in our community. So one of the most crucial roles of a leader is to be a learner. In a modern world, leaders should accept to be wrong. They should be, we will learn it all, rather than we know it all. Another leadership quote that I like, sir, is this: the very leaders who have feared changing their minds must change their minds about changing their minds. So this quote can be true for those on both sides of this argument. Having thought long and hard about this, I think those advocating the return of senator must change their minds about changing their minds. So as leaders, sometimes you have to change course if you've made a mistake. Equally, at times, you need to keep your nerve and allow any change time to settle in. So yesterday I quoted from a letter from 2013, and having worked tirelessly on option B, a campaign for a fairer system, I cannot bring myself to letting down those 80% of people who took the trouble to vote for change in that referendum. Sir, I will close by once again quoting from the JP. In fact, the article was written by a St John resident and the headline read, "Jersey doesn't need senators. What we need is effective leadership, politicians who listen to voters and deliver results." So the article went on to say, the debate is a distraction to keep us from noticing the real issues. A system that's resistant to change, allergic to accountability, and utterly detached from the concerns of everyday islanders. So taking all of that into account, I think it's time to keep our nerve. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. As I said in my previous speech, I committed to supporting the reintroduction of senators in my manifesto, and my view has not changed. The office of senator is the clearest and most democratic element of our electoral framework. If this proposition is adopted, every eligible voter in Jersey has an equal say in choosing their senators. 9 votes, 9 seats in the Assembly, a system that is as equitable as it is effective. In removing senators at the last election, some have the view that it made our system simpler, but it was ironically stripped of its most straightforward and widely understood component. And that's what I heard on the doorsteps of St Brelard when I was campaigning, and it's what I've heard from parishioners ever since. I was at the parish hall for Deputy Miller's meeting, and I've received many emails in the same vein. I have received no emails or contact to suggest the opposite. The message I consistently hear is that the public want the senators back. And it's not merely my opinion, the view substantiated by history. Over the years, we've seen repeated evidence of public support for retaining senators. The Connétable of St Relard referred to the 2006 Ipsos Mori poll, which indicated a majority preference for keeping them. And a similar sentiment was recorded in the Electoral Commission's findings in 2012. And again in another Ipsos Mori poll conducted by a scrutiny panel in 2017. Time and time again, islanders have expressed their desire to retain this vital office. If there was a referendum now on the senators, just as there was on the Connétable, I think members know how islanders would vote. And it's not a question of having to trade in one type of member for another. Islanders are entitled to want the states to consist of more than one type of states member. A robust democracy thrives when its people have a meaningful say in their governance, and the ability to vote in senatorial elections provided just that. When they were abolished, we diminished the voice of our electorate, and I would argue that this made our democracy less representative. That's certainly how the public felt, and I think they were right. There's little evidence to suggest that the removal of senators increased voter turnout. Indeed, the opposite seems to be true. I've heard people tell me that they didn't vote and won't vote again until the roll is restored. If anything, history has shown us that senatorial elections engage the public more effectively than other elections. They encourage debate on island-wide issues rather than focusing solely on local or parish matters. We need only to look to our sister island, Guernsey, to see the impact of an all-island electoral system. The recent shift to a similar model has resulted in greater political engagement and increased turnout, albeit some Guernsey politicians do consider that the all-island mandate has affected their relationship with their parishes. But we're not proposing to go all out for senators, we're proposing a balance between parish, district and all-island. Another point that I want to address is the current claim that our electoral system would become more complex if we reintroduce senators. I disagree. Any system can be complex. What is needed is clear guidance on how it operates. In the UK, there are parish councillors, district councillors, county councillors. Sometimes there are unitary authorities covering all of these tiers. There are mayors, members of regional assemblies, members of the devolved legislatures, MPs in the House of Commons, peers in the House of Lords. And for nearly 40 years, we had members of the European Parliament as well. By comparison, having senators, deputy and constables doesn't seem too much of an ask. What matters is whether the system is broadly fair, effective and serves the interests of the public. A vote in favour of this proposition would bring back a political office that the public have demonstrated they want, and the one that is the easiest to understand. It would be the most democratic, straightforward and equitable aspect of our electoral system. I too have listened carefully to arguments on both sides of the debate, and I recognise that there are legitimate concerns. However, those concerns should be addressed in a way that enhances democratic participation rather than undermines it. Reinstating the office of senator would not sacrifice fundamental democratic principles. We can restore the political landscape of our island, ensuring the balance and stability of our assembly, a balance that up until 2022 had served us very well since 1948. We don't have to conform to external pressures or model ourselves after other jurisdictions if it doesn't serve the best interests of Jersey. We've heard that view from the Attorney General. And as I said previously, like it or not, the public are not really bothered by the Venice Commission. As Deputy Miller said, senators have a deep cultural significance to a majority of our population in Jersey. Jersey is a prosperous and successful island. We must be doing something right. We've always paddled our own canoe, and we should continue to do so by making choices that strengthen rather than weaken our democratic institutions. We should seek to restore the electorate's ability to more directly shape their own government. We shouldn't ignore the electorate who are telling us loud and clear that this is what they want, and I will be supporting this proposition.
Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me well online?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. I'm really grateful for all contributors to this debate, and I was listening as Connétable of St. John. I'm really reflecting. My voting records on this is very well known. I 4 times in this assembly voted to take senators out and to try to achieve the more democratic way of election in what was in my perception. If I'm going now to my constituencies at St. Helier North, and I was knocking on the doors during the elections, I think the majority of the district actually did raise with me that they are not happy with losing senators. The district is diverse, but there are lots of part of the district are countryside. Since the proposition was launched, I did have around 6 surgeries, attended in various ways. And I would say that currently probably the views were 50-50. So it's something that people do think and do feel they need to consider. Where I'm struggling and where I'm thinking where it will vote, and I will continue to listen. We have very diverse assembly now. I'm not sure why we're thinking if senators will go back, we will have less diverse assembly. I've heard the arguments that St. Helier will lose votes. Why we decided that actually 35,000 of population, if will not be engaged properly, why we wouldn't have senators elected in St. Helier, from St. Helier, even though the senators needs to deal with island-wide issues, as it looks like. But the question is why we are sure that nobody would represent St. Helier. We are saying that senators are losing touch with the public. I'm asking why senators would not do drop-in sessions like any deputies do. And actually, to my surgeries, I have people coming from other parts of the island. It's not closed only for St. Helier. It's also open for other islanders. And I cannot see why senators would not continue to do drop-in sessions and continue to communicate with the public. Another thing, why, and a third why we think that senators less democratic. So I personally would prefer to have one type of state member. I was trying to do it at the beginning, 2019, 6 years ago, but we are not there. So why the compromise with constables feels more democratic than the compromise with the senators? I don't know. And this is where I'm really thinking how I'm going to vote this time. What is clear, this is not the last debate. If senators will be introduced or not be introduced, we will have more debates in the next term. But it's clear for me that we didn't really manage to convince the public that this system is better over the last 4 years. And actually in St. Helier North, despite what Deputy Tadia yesterday told that we didn't have reform candidate, we did have reform candidate in all 3 elections in St. Helier North, we did have reform candidates. I'm reflecting now what Deputy Miles said, and I'm grateful for Deputy Miles, and actually most of the system are complex around the world. It's around how we make clear rules that the system will work. And I believe if senators would be introduced, we would need to look what does it mean to have 3 types of states members and what roles they would have. There is lots of questions, and I will continue to listen to the debate. Thank you.
Well, Deputy Felton.
Thank you, sir. I am particularly pleased to follow the last speaker, actually, because it was people such as Deputy Gardner who are undecided that I was hoping to speak to in my speech. I think what may have been lost in some of the speeches in this debate so far is we're not just debating the reinstatement of senators. What's quite very different about this proposition, and Deputy Miller mentions it in her report, is whilst the other propositions that have been brought before us in this term of office haven't specified the way in which to bring back senators or the island-wide mandate, This specific proposition is very specific about that. It includes how senators would be introduced. And more importantly, it suggests that the deputy should be removed from each of the districts. And that's why I think even if you are in favour of reintroducing senators, you need to think very carefully and think twice about whether or not you support this particular proposition. The deputy mentions in her report that this is a response to people feeling disenfranchised. We've heard from many speakers during the debates over the last few days around how actually this system is the most equitable, the current system is the most equitable, fair system that we've ever had. And the previous Privileges and Procedures Committee, I know, put an awful lot of work into working out what would be a fair system that would lead to as much voter equity as we could possibly maintain on Ireland. So it seems to me that it is an odd response to people feeling disenfranchised to vote in favour of a system that, as Deputy Alex Curtis made the point very well yesterday in his speech, this proposed system in this particular proposition actually does disenfranchise some voters. Specifically, as Deputy Curtis outlined, the voters of St Helier South and St Helier North. So I think, speaking to Deputy Gardner's speech just before me, I would say to Deputy Gardner, if you are thinking that senators may be a good thing to reintroduce, you may well wish to think twice about whether this is the right way to reintroduce senators and whether it actually serves your constituency in the best possible manner. I have been disappointed by some comments made in this debate, and I think there's been some unfortunate comments made in the debate. I was actually surprised to hear Deputy Miller in her proposal speech when she suggested that we shouldn't listen to people from outside of the island that were theorists and specialists in this particular subject. And I did think to myself, I wonder if Deputy Miller would say the same to the Fiscal Policy Panel when she next meets them. I think it is important that we are able to take on board advice from specialists in areas, particularly when it is something that is so fundamental to our democracy and so important to get right. I am in favour of maintaining the current system. I think that what we ended up with post the 2022 election is a far more equitable system than we had before. As other people have said, we have by far the most diverse assembly that we've ever had on this island, and that is something we should be celebrating and protecting. We shouldn't be looking backwards. And for me, what is being proposed in this proposition does not give a fairer system. It's backwards looking, and as I said, it disenfranchises some voters merely to appease people who feel disenfranchised. I think, again, going through the report on this proposition, Deputy Miller discusses promoting fairness. She makes the point that in some districts it was people were able to get elected with far fewer numbers than others. I think that we do have a lot of work to do in terms of voter engagement. Again, I don't think that this is the solution. I know my people in St Helier Central have felt disenfranchised for many, many, many years due to previous systems. It's going to take a lot to win their confidence. What will win their confidence is the type of diverse assembly that we see today. I think also it's worth pointing out that we have, as an assembly, just yesterday agreed to keep the constables in the assembly. I work very well with constables. I've got a lot of respect for them. They are very good as ministers, and I don't think that having a parochial vote actually should prevent somebody from being a minister. So again, I was disappointed that the report suggests that we're becoming too parochial. I don't think we are. I don't think, as Deputy Ward said, we think, I think that we all vote and think on an island-wide basis, and whether you're a parish constable or you're a deputy for a district, that doesn't prevent you from being able to undertake that thinking. So I would urge those that are on the fence to think very, very carefully about what they're actually voting for here, to think very, very carefully before we make what is currently the most equitable system that we've ever had into a less equitable system. And I urge you to vote against this proposition.
Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. You haven't been here, sir, to listen to the, is it 2 days? I've lost counts of how long we've been talking, sir, so it's good to have a fresh, not that your deputy is any less fresh when he's been sitting there for so long, but you have to listen through to debates. And I just say, sir, that we are speaking about ourselves, to ourselves. And I'm not sure that we're speaking to islanders. And I don't know who the movers of the proposition and the defenders of senators have been talking to, but I think that islanders want us to deliver on their priorities. And I question whether or not this is a good use of our time. So I'm going to be very brief, sir, looking at the introduction of the timers that I asked to have introduced a while ago and delighted to see. Sir, decisions are not binary. There are trade-off decisions on all matters. I believe that we should be talking about how to allocate the scarce resources that is taxpayers' money, public money for public good. I would suggest to members to reflect on the reality that the Chief Executive Officer of the States of Jersey said that ministers, and all of us, need to prioritise precious resources. We mustn't do too much. We can only do a few things and a few things well. I represent, sir, the people of St Saviour, and I'm sorry that my deputy colleagues, the health minister, yes, a couple of them, and the constable's not here, but maybe he'll listen to me at my speech, and he'll want to come in, because I want to say that at the end of our term as the representatives of St Saviour, we're going to deliver for our parish. And, sir, whilst I'm wearing a St Saviour badge, I'm going to put the island badge on as well, because I think it is absolute nonsense, sir, to say that deputies do not look after the island. We do. We do. And to suggest that there's a somehow greater issue of island-wide mandates with island-wide issues is absolute rubbish, sir, in my view. I know, so I've not pulled my weight in the last year, and I regret that. I've been unwell. But I've promised to endlessly not be in a bad place. It's 2 years today since a parish church funeral I was so proud and privileged that the Council of Ministers went to. 700 people, a life cut short. But I've got to move on, and I will. I can celebrate the past, but I can move on. And I want to work with my deputy colleagues in St Saviour and our constable to improve the really concerning issues that are affecting the people's lives of St Saviour. Cost of living, housing, healthcare, community facilities, and important traffic issues, road issues. I'm confident in our deputies. And by the way, sir, we've got a deputy who's the health minister. We've got a deputy who is the scrutiny panel chair who scrutinises him. We've got an assistant chief minister. We've got a respected member who's on lots of panels, doing lots of hard work. I've forgotten maybe one of them. We're all important, sir. Our constable was a deputy. He was a minister. Was he a lesser minister, sir, because he wasn't a senator? Is the current constable of St John who gave an excellent speech. Is he a lesser minister because he's a constable? No, he's not. We're all equal in here, sir. And the mandate, there's my constable, sir. He was no lesser and I'm sorry if I did make some remarks which offended him, but I didn't mean to. He was no lesser a minister, sir, as a deputy. He had a mandate from the people of St Saviour in that system. And a constable is not a lesser minister. I do worry about the fact that this island-wide idea is somehow going to magically deliver a better Jersey. It's going to make Jersey great again. Is it? I don't think so. Every deputy, every constable has to balance the local accountability that they have with island-wide responsibility. We, of course, have to advance our issues of our parishes and our constituencies. That's our job, but not at the cost of island-wide issues. That's why we're here, sir. We're all here together in an assembly. Every deputy has to do that. Every constable has to do that. The argument that deputies are somehow second-class citizens is wrong. I think it's false. I don't want to dwell on the past. I've got a sign above my desk that says, do not spend too much of today on yesterday, so I won't. So briefly, I will laser in on the micro matters and the macro island-wide issues. They equally matter. I did serve as one of the senators. I was one of the last senators standing. I tried in my last, before I got decided to retire, I was one of the last people who supported senators. I amended stuff endlessly, much to the irritation of people. I lost that debate. But there's one thing that hasn't been said, sir, in this debate. Analysis of past election of senatorial results says one thing. The same top-ranking senators, in other words, the ones that get in, would likely be elected in their districts. The order may be different, but actually the same results are the same. It would hardly make a difference. So if we needed to prove, sir, that the multi-seat constituents, which are arguably better, are manifestly better and has been explained, we've got the proof. We had proper elections last time round, and they were almost a subset of the senatorials. They were mini senatorials, sir, if that makes members feel better. And they worked. The problem isn't the method, it's the participation. That's what we've got to do. We've got to improve our voter turnout. And I say to the binary question, those three people that turned up to St Saviour, the three people who wanted to have senators, I accept that the reply to the binary question was yes. But is it the right question, sir? It's about trade-offs. When I asked actually that person whether they wanted sunny days tomorrow, they said, yes, please. When I actually said, do you realise that there's a trade-off in this discussion? That actually losing a deputy of St Saviour, the cost of legislation, the cost of actually bringing this all forward, would actually be less outcomes for you, potentially. I've spent time actually working it out. I'm pretty sad at spreadsheets, sir. I think that this has cost us so far, this debate, I think it's cost us £30,000. 30,000 of public money, let alone the frustration of the people that have had to listen to this and all the journalists, etc. Evidence scrutiny brought forward a life-changing report. I think the deputy from St Saviour knows what I'm talking about. And I just say very delicately, the money that we've spent in the last 3 days would have changed 15 lives for the rest of this year. It's about allocation of scarce resources, I say to the Treasury Minister. We need to transform lives. It was John Maynard Keynes that said, when the facts change, I change my mind. We've got facts. We've had them, and we had to change our minds. And I give those members who may not be, I don't know whether this is a done deal yet, it's difficult to know sometimes, but giving voters 3 ballot papers and 9 votes for 9 senators is not clarity. It's utter confusion, especially when voters hardly know the names of people, let alone what they stand for. That's not democracy. It's a falsehood of a democracy. It's a lottery, sir. Just like the casino that the Gambling Control Committee once wanted. I said no to casinos, sir, and I had the backing of the Assembly. Let's not have a casino of a lottery election with 3 different ballot papers with 9 seats in senators in multi-seat constituencies, which work. And then I hope not a none of the above candidate. Like our constable, I hope he gets back in. It's not fair, sir. We're not basically giving people the truth in terms of the reality that there are trade-offs. It's not that simple, sir. Just to say, oh, well, we'll get some money in and we'll reallocate some resources and we'll just bingo, yes, casinos, that's right. We'll get bingo, we'll get a better island-wide mandate. It's not true. Is the outcomes of a senatorial election better? People might feel better, but what they actually want is outcomes. I would like the Treasury Minister to focus on the most important pressing needs of islanders. So the privileges and procedures President can deal with the outcome of this debate. But I worry about this debate. It's exposed some real splits within the Council of Ministers. I don't want to see this Council of Ministers to do anything else apart from be united and focused on delivery. The Treasury Minister's shaking her head, and yet she's responsible for asking somebody to take out legislation which another minister's going to have to pay for. Absolutely, it's not right to say there's no trade-off, sir. There is a trade-off. There is a cost of doing everything. And I might be told later, sir, that I know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Well, I think I know what the value of democracy is, sir. And democracy is about fairness. Deputy Sir Philip Balash sounded like a more liberal person of the Conservative Liberal Party, if I may say. And the Conservative member, the Assistant Chief Minister, he's the other deputy, he does a jolly good job. And maybe Deputy Sir Philip Balash has been speaking to the Canadian Liberal Party, jolly good. We need to work with them. Sir, I don't want to joke, I don't want to make anything light of this. The divisions in this Assembly have been clear. I'm told that it's almost going to be a tied vote. The vote on whether to move to 2030 was extremely narrow, sir. I don't want to see divisions creeping in this Assembly. I want us to be united between now and the next election to deliver on the people's priorities that put us here to serve them with outcomes. I don't want to speak any longer, but I cannot vote for this proposition. I've thought about abstaining, but I've been persuaded that I should vote against it because the principles are. I'm not against senators. I'd like to have them in a Senate one day, but not now. I want us to concentrate on the people's priorities. It's not indecision. I want to actually have a proposal that is fair, evidenced, and is the priority for the people. And I think I owe the islanders and the people of St Saviour better. I want to get back to work and on what truly matters. I will be voting against this proposition, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, Deputy Alex Curtis.
Apologies, sir. Members are getting tired, and I will do my best to follow standing orders and not repeat the good comments made by others. I did want to speak on this because, for a start, I feel I sometimes have darted around the room when we talk about the younger generation here. And unfortunately, I may have to be one of the representatives of that, being the youngest elected member of this sitting. And I'll come back to that, about who are we representing and who are we speaking to when we talk about this. First, I want to talk about perceptions, though. Deputy Reniff captured a lot of what I think others would have wanted to have said and hopefully sped the debate up with such an eloquent speech. But he almost came to the conclusion that this was a circular question to a solution, that I need senators because I need senators, or I want senators because I want senators. And one of the other perceptions is, well, I want that because I can't vote for who I want to. And we've heard that kind of somewhat dismissed as well. I just want to give members the numbers from 2018 as to what that really means. In the 2018 election, we had candidates for senator, for Conatab, and for deputy. There were eight seats for senator, of which 17 candidates stood. There were 12 seats for Conatab, of which 14 candidates stood, 1 withdrew, resulting in 1 contested election. And there were 60 people who ran for 29 deputy positions, so roughly a similar ratio in competitiveness when it came to senator to deputy. But what that means is out of the 91 candidates that stood, you only ever had a chance of influencing 17 of those. 74 people in that, no matter how much you loved them, you had no say in. And if we return to a system like this, you still won't have a say in it. What did that mean in 2018? It meant assistant ministers and ministers who you might have loved and wanted to see return, you'd still have no say in. We now have Deputy Luce, who could be our candidate Luce, and you may really want him back as Minister for the Environment. He may not want to be a senator. And so somebody who tells me I didn't get a vote for who I wanted to, I'm asking, who did you want to vote for? And what did they stand as? Because the statistics are, they still won't stand as a senator. And the statistics are they will still, if they're competent, and the Assembly wants to feature them in a council, feature in a council or feature in a prominent role. Likewise, topping the polls in St Lawrence, St John and Trinity, candidate Morell may decide whatever he has next time. He may decide he wants to complete a second term as Minister for Economic Development, but he knows that he can do so under a candidature of deputy and not senator. So what happens when my constituents come to me and say, I didn't get to vote for who I wanted to? My question will be, who did you want to vote for and what did they stand as? We've heard the arguments about the value of a senator, what's actually any different, and anything that offered a change, Deputy Tadier's amendment, has already been washed away. So perceptions are a hard one. People are saying, I really want this. We've had a lot of time, members, to consider whether it actually makes a difference and the risks involved. And we have to make hard decisions here against perception sometimes. We've seen petitions requesting things like a living wage for pensioners. And the perception is we need to give more money. And the reality is we have to make compromise, and sometimes we have to say the hard things to people who hopefully value us saying hard things to them in return. The hard thing is that if we want equity and if we want you to have a fair vote, that what's proposed today is not it. And that comes back to equity. Now, I proposed some numbers off the back of a spreadsheet shared about equity, and the story is sad, and I won't repeat that. But it does leave an interesting question I'd like the proposer to reflect on if I am to retain some open mind. If this passes, I think one of her concern about the Boundary Commission was bureaucracy. It was about delay. She said originally when she proposed this is a straightforward and simple thing, members can accept it. So if an amendment comes forward, changing where those deputies are taken from to create something more equitable, no consultation, straight, nice and simple, will she accept it? Will she accept more deputies lost from her district in the pursuit of senators if it is fair? And I'd like her to reflect on that and answer that, because that might well come in the legislation. What are we actually playing for? Is it for senators, or is it a fight for the rural parishes? Good quality representatives, I wrote here. Yes, I think we get good quality representatives under this system. It's quite clear. We've got a good bunch of people here who have different opinions, stretch debates on too long sometimes, but actually I think it's a good assembly. I'll touch on age. It has to be said, it's true, that the people who want this are in an older demographic, and we all represent an older demographic because we're all getting older and we know the challenges. But if I speak to people my age and they look at this debate, they go, really? Is that what you do? You talk about, I need to just get out and I need to see people who bring legislation, they need to make change. I worry, for example, about the movie's original remit, which is a social security fund. People my age worry that it runs out in 2081. This assembly has said that's fine. They've actually said the fund is in good health because it has funds until 2081. My generation care, that's not long enough. But no, we're not talking about that today. The arguments today have been so good, I fear that if this is a close one, the arguments put forward just don't stack up, and I've heard this about some propositions we debate here, that's if we see this pass, those who vote contra will have won the debate, but they will have lost the vote.
Very much. Deputy Alves.
Thank you, sir. So I'm just going to boil this down to, I think, sort of three issues. There's the issue of unnecessary complexity and disruption. So the whole point of the current system was to simplify representation. Reintroducing these senators would add another layer of complexity. It undermines these efforts and it leads to political instability. How many times have we heard in this assembly about instability causing issues? For example, when we've discussed things such as tax reforms. My second point would be campaign challenges and inequality. We've heard today that an island-wide campaign requires more resources, which potentially favours more well-funded or well-known candidates, and that this in turn will obviously decrease diversity and create another barrier for people who are considering to stand. In addition, we've also spoken about the voter equity for some voters, as mentioned previously by other members, and actually I want to just reiterate that voting for this will decrease the value of the votes for some of your constituents. And I sincerely hope that especially my fellow St Helier representatives remember this when they cast their vote. And lastly, this is one that's been brought up quite a lot, that there is public demand for this. So there is no clear public demand for this. There has been no overwhelming demand from the public to bring back the senators. And I'm going to use some facts and data to back this up. And I'm not going to mention the referendum, because that's been mentioned enough. I'm actually going to be looking at recent data that we've collected from islanders and facts. So I'm just going to start off with the 2022 Jersey Opinions and Lifestyle Survey report, which I really hope that people will not bring into question the validity of, because we often do this survey. Figure 3.4, it says here, adults who did not vote in the June 22 election were asked why they did not vote. In top place, with 30%, wouldn't have made a difference. Second place, 28%, don't trust the political system. Third place, 24%, not interested in the election. Joint fourth place, didn't know enough about the candidates. And other, I'm not sure what other was. The next one was nobody I wanted to vote for, 17%, which was actually joint with I don't understand the political system, 17%. What was at the bottom of that? Loss of the island-wide senator role, 3%. So, in June 2023, following an on-island piece of research, which was independently conducted by Dr. Chris Pitch, a professor at the University of Nottingham, he published a 27-page report entitled Exploring the Voter Journey in the Context of Jersey, Engagement, Barriers and Recommendations. Under the section entitled Barriers of Engagement, Why People Don't Vote, I'm going to quote some of the direct contributions given in those focus groups by people who live on the island. Bearing in mind, this report was published in June 2023. The system is confusing, was quoted at least twice. Political system a muddle. I do not understand the system as much as I am trying to find out. It is very confusing for outsiders. If I struggle, kids and young people will struggle too. The political system is confusing. All are island-wide and constables should be removed from the states. Whole electoral system is madness and baffling. Too much duplication. Too many politicians. It's not just outsiders that don't know or are confused on the system and voting, but Jersey people don't know either. So, we've heard that lots of islanders didn't vote in 2022 because they had lost the island-wide mandate. Yet voter turnout did not radically plummet in 2022, despite the fact that we'd introduced a completely new system. Our voter turnout only went down by 1%. And just as a reminder, and to address some other members' points that these reforms decreased turnout for elections which included the option of senators, 39% in 2014. In 2018, it was 43%. If there was such a mass public protest by those annoyed at losing the senatorial option, choosing to stay away from the polls, then where did the voters come from in 2022? Is it possible that the new system actually resonated with some of the people who didn't usually vote? I know that was some of the conversations that I had when I was on the doorstep. Shouldn't we actually be looking to build on that this time round, instead of simply going backwards to a system which itself did not deliver higher voter turnout across the island? As members, how many times have we voted for things that many of our constituents aren't necessarily in favour of, but they are in the best interests of the island and best practice? So to those members who I know are feeling the pressure because they have had a petition signed by a small number of constituents calling to reinstate the senators, I wish to remind those members of the thousands of people who signed a petition against the imposition of GST. How did members vote then? Because I know how my party voted. Our priority in this assembly should be raising political awareness and education and decreasing any barriers that present to people voting or standing for election. So we've had an education and awareness programme that's already in place, that has been running for obviously this term, which is 3 years in at the moment, but it was also running previously. And we are now looking to basically scrap all that work, or the majority of that work, and give less than a year to re-educate. This is disruptive, but not only is it disruptive, I'm also going to raise another issue which hasn't been spoken about in this debate, which is the cost. What is the impact on our finances? Well, let's have a look at that, shall we? I know many members are aware that we now have a fantastic little States Assembly booklet that's been translated into a number of different languages that tries to explain our system and how that is made up. Well, sir, just to get those reprinted and retranslated, you're looking at about £3,000. That's not including the human resource that's associated with that. We've also got an animation video, which will also cost another thousands of pounds to look at redoing. But the harder cost, also not to mention, an island-wide mail shot for the manifesto booklets will have a higher cost implication because it will be a bigger booklet. But what's most concerning is actually the cost that is much harder to estimate, which is in trying to re-educate the public about another change in our system. So, I think members need to think very, very hard about this. Let's allow this new system a chance to establish before we further confuse the public. Let's let the changes which are implemented for the last elections actually have some time to resonate with islanders. And let's turn our focus to raising awareness and knowledge of our elections, how to vote, and increase our voter turnout, especially by those aged under 55. Thank you, sir.
So, could I just ask the Deputy to confirm something?
Are you seeking a point of clarification?
Yes, sir. The Deputy mentioned a report, and can she just confirm the date of that report?
Would you give way for that point of clarification?
That's absolutely fine, sir. It was published in June 2023. The name of the report is Exploring the Voter Journey in the Context of Jersey, Engagement Barriers and Recommendations, and it was conducted by Dr. Chris Pitch, a professor at Nottingham University. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. As someone who's previously voted for senators, the debate over the last few days and in my previous discussions with parishioners has presented some challenges to some of my original assumptions. It is true at the time of the election that some parishioners felt aggrieved about the removal of the island-wide mandate. Since being elected, some parishioners have continued to call for the return of the senators, but I have to say that this has not been a consistent issue for them, and it has not been at the forefront of our parish debates, as it has perhaps in the case of some other parishes. In St Clement, I believe we've moved on, and as one parishioner put it, we are well represented by our connotab and our deputies. What this tells me is that what matters most to people when it comes to our responsibilities as elected members is that we do right by them. Surely, if we all aspire to do our best by our parishioners, we don't need the complexity of 3 roles in our parishes. This is simply overkill and designed to make it even more complicated for the electorate to exercise their democratic right to vote. So, like some of us in the Assembly, I have no experience of the system where senators, constables and deputies worked alongside one another. But I accepted in good faith the views of those who did and who wished to see a return. What I know now is that this has not been a priority in my contact with parishioners, but what is important to them is what we're doing as an assembly on issues about housing, health, education, jobs, taxes, welfare, planning and the environment, things that affect their lives. I did say, sir, I would support efforts to return the island-wide mandate, but that opportunity to provide an evidence-based approach to this major constitutional change has been taken away, and I don't have any other explanation to offer constituents other than to say Deputy Miller held some roadshows with a few people from a certain demographic, and this is where we are. This, in my view, disenfranchises the majority of those who may have a view, but haven't been able to express it yet as to how the role of senators would or could work in our current democratic arrangement. What I do know is that the current system enabled me to be here as an elected representative. It enabled me to undertake an island-wide role as a first-time politician. It enabled me to be a minister, something I consider an exceptional privilege. It is my contribution to public life that is valued by my parishioners, others who speak with me outside of my parish, as well as some of the colleagues in the Assembly, and not the role I hold. Representation is what matters. Our current arrangement has brought forward a diverse Assembly, as many have said, and a fairer electoral system that went before, and it is now starting to reflect the population it serves. If we revert back to what went before, can we be sure the representation will be the same as now, or better for all islanders, and particularly with regard to parishioners in St Clement? I'm questioning in this debate if Deputy Miller's proposal is going to serve the interest of islanders, both urban and country. It is not democratic to rely on evidence that falls short of the evidence I think most islanders would expect to see in support of her argument. So St Clement is represented by those who have previously held office as bailiff, senator, minister and assistant ministers, all of which have been required to have an island-wide focus. We are all deputies, now working collegiately and collaboratively on our local and island-wide programme. So why would we need to change this? This proposition has challenged a number of assumptions I previously held, as I said earlier. One being that senators are the only way to reflect the will of the people on an island-wide basis. I'm not against senators, I just don't believe we're in the right place or the right time to support Deputy Miller's proposition. We have a long way to build confidence in our democracy with the public and stimulate interest across all ages and all sections of our community. It has been stated earlier that we're a parliamentary democracy and we must retain confidence in our evidence-based democratic processes, or as Conor Tarb of St John has put it, hold our nerve. The current system has been observed and informed by constitutional experts which tell us that the current system we have is both fair and equitable. And let's not forget, people voted for this change. Some people are bereft still on the loss of the island-wide mandate and the senatorial role, but many people have moved on and have expectations of current elected members to deliver for them on the matters that matter most to them. Jersey's system has evolved since senators were last elected. The current system with deputies was implemented to address certain issues. Have we considered whether those issues have been resolved or if new challenges have emerged? Of course, the return of senators and the island-wide mandate might be appropriate, but the simple fact is we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because we haven't done the evaluation of the current system. And to fully understand what needs to change, and more importantly, to ask the people of the island as a whole, not just those who shout loudest, how we govern our island. This may retain senators and a return of the island-wide mandate, but we simply don't know if that will be the case, made by the people, for the people. So I'll conclude by saying this, in my view, is a serious constitutional matter, and there is a need to find the right mechanism to establish the governance of the island in line with voter expectations and, has been said, international standards. We had it for the current arrangements. Why is the same not expected on this proposition? It is on that basis that I will be not supporting this proposition from Deputy Miller.
Deputy Dublé.
Thank you, sir. I was just quickly rewriting the start of my speech based on the previous two speakers, and I wanted to remark on, I enjoyed listening to both of those speeches, and I think the competence and the depth of knowledge displayed from Deputy Owls was really notable, and the thoughtful reflection and reasoning from Deputy Wilson, I really appreciated both of those speeches. Low voter turnout was something that Deputy Owls addressed, and I learned something from those numbers. I found that really interesting and really relevant to the debate. Indeed, it's weighted against this proposition and quite significantly, I think, given those numbers that Deputy Owls quoted. And in terms of the low voter turnout, I agree with previous speakers who have said that we can't judge it from one election, and we must let this bed in. And I wanted to remind members that this engagement with our political system, it's down to us. We're responsible for engaging voters in the democratic process, and it's down to us to inspire our citizens to actually go and use their vote. And part of that is committing to conducting our business in and out of the Assembly with dignity and respect for one another, and coming to the Assembly with well-researched propositions and speeches, and giving matters that thought and reflection, and that is what is going to increase the voter turnout. In theory, sir, I wouldn't be opposed to an island-wide mandate, but this proposition today is not the solution. Others have said it better than I can, that the numbers just don't add up. And it has, I have taken some time to look at the numbers and reflect on them, and they're very clear. It does not add up. And so much work went into the reform of our system before the previous election. And it was numbers-based, and it was intensive work, not just crafting all the different possibilities, but explaining those to members and helping members to understand what the impact of those different options would be on islanders from different parts of the island. And I really feel, again, I'm going to mention Deputy Owls again, because she pioneered this work, and she put blood, sweat and tears into it. She put years of her life into this to come up with something for our island, which collectively in the States Assembly we listened to and we compromised, because what we have now is not perfect, but it's the best system that we have ever had. And it's a result of compromise, which I think we need to do more in this Assembly. And again, it was based on evidence, research, and best practice. It wasn't based on what was popular or what would be the easy decision. And I would like members who are undecided or who are thinking of voting for this to actually really reflect on whether they are going to take an approach today that is based on evidence and research, and to vote accordingly. Across our island, yes, there are some who advocate for bringing back senators, but thanks to the numbers that Deputy Owls has quoted, we know that is a very small percentage. I think she said it was 3%. It's certainly not the biggest issue that my parishioners and islanders are contacting me about. They're more concerned with the quality of our health service and the cost of living. So I want to talk thematically and get to the essence of what this debate is actually about. And members may expect me to talk about diversity, but I'm not actually going to cover that, because I thought that previous speakers such as Deputy Kovacs and Deputy Poiré and others have covered that excellently. It is about diversity, but more importantly, this is a debate about power. It's a debate about how much power different types of people across our island have. It's a debate about how power is distributed, and it's in our gift to decide how we distribute that power. And in a legitimate democracy, power lies equally in the hands of every citizen. And voting for and electing individuals to represent them is how that power is exercised by our citizens. And in a legitimate democracy, every vote has the same amount of power. And the current system, I'll repeat, the current system we have is the closest we have ever had to this equal distribution of power. And I can understand the feelings of the 3% of islanders or thereabouts who think that they might have more power if they can place more votes. But we understand the numbers, don't we? Those of us in the Assembly who have listened and have looked at the numbers, we understand that that is not the case for everybody. And the evidence shows that there's a table, sir, on page 8 of Amendment 2 that shows it quite clearly. That what we're being asked to do today is to place a greater amount of power in the hands of some islanders. And where does that power come from? We can't make more. It comes from other islanders. And that's not what democratic legitimacy looks like. It is not right to take power from the hands of some and put it into the hands of others. So, to finish, sir, I can't vote for this. It would be against my principles and quite simply against basic democratic principles. I can't take power away from some and give it to others, and for my own integrity, I'm going to be voting against this, sir.
Very much. Deputy Ballard.
Sir, I would just like to give notice, the 30-minute notice, that I will be seeking to enact Standing Order 84.
You're giving notice. It's a half an hour's notice. Yes, very well. Deputy Balash.
So I was just looking at the manifesto of the Jersey Liberal Conservatives, and there's a commitment in that manifesto to keep an open mind as to the reintroduction of the island-wide vote. And I'd just like to say that the two members of the party have kept an open mind. They have had a very interesting discussion or discussions about the issues, and they have reached different conclusions. And I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of. Indeed, I think the future of party politics would be much brighter and much more democratic if members of a political party were not generally speaking to respond to a three-line whip, but were to vote in accordance with their conscience. And that is what both Deputy Ferry and I are going to do. Sir, I want to say just one thing, because this debate has gone on a very long time. And it follows up from what I think the youngest member of the Assembly has said, who I believe has made some quite good speeches during the course of the last few days. I think I can probably claim to be the oldest member of the Assembly. And I think one thing that we can all agree upon is that the majority, the vast majority of those who support the reintroduction of the island-wide vote are over 50, and probably most of them are over 62. We are trying to make our electoral system simpler, clearer, and easier to understand, more accessible for the younger generation, who are at the moment not terribly engaged in our electoral system. And I think that those of us who are inclined to support the reintroduction of the senatorial class ought to think very carefully about that. I think the reintroduction of senators is not going to achieve the end of making our electoral system easier to understand for younger people. It's not going to have the slightest effect upon the number of people who come out to vote. And indeed, I believe, if anything, it will probably act in the contrary sense of making the system less accessible and less easy to follow.
Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. I just stand to say, you know, I will be supporting the proposition. There's no question in my mind. I do feel that the loss of the island-wide mandate has led to a situation where there is less cohesion within the Assembly. I think there is more parochialism within the Assembly as a result. And I do think you need to have some people whose constituency is the whole island, who are not bound by parochial issues and who can seek to, you know, look above them. I think that's particularly important when it comes to deciding on the Chief Minister and the formation of the Council of Ministers. I'm not of the view, as Deputy Moore's proposal was yesterday, that you know, senatorial seats should link directly to the Council of Ministers' places. But I think, and I do remember the interim CEO between Mr. Parker and what was his name, Paul Martin. I do remember him saying to me when the vote had taken place to remove the senators, he said there will be, in his view, a democratic deficit when it comes to choosing the Chief Minister, because so few people or nobody will really have a mandate for that, and in a system without parties, that lack of mandate becomes a big issue, and it does become a big issue. And, you know, I do, it's interesting, I've heard people talking about, you know, democracy in Jersey and, you know, we need to increase engagement. I completely agree on the increasing engagement, but I stood in a district where I had 47% of my district's voters turned out. St Helier Central, I think we're looking at something like 15% of voters turned out, oh, sorry, 28% of voters turned out. But that meant that Deputy Owls, who got the most votes in St Helier Central, had 961 votes and less than 16% of the vote. But quite understandably, Deputy Owls could stand as Chief Minister, could become Chief Minister, but would have only 16% of the vote in her district. That would be her mandate. That is a tiny mandate and a really difficult mandate to decide upon Chief Ministers in the future. Whereas a senatorial, well, I say senatorial, but an island-wide mandate at least gives our Assembly, when it comes to choosing a Chief Minister, at least it gives us a sense of where their mandate is. You know, I know that Deputy Moore, who won the mandate as Chief Minister at the beginning of this Assembly, had something like 2,700 votes cast. 3 times as many people in this island voted for Deputy Moore as voted for Deputy Owls. And that, you know, in a situation where we don't have that kind of island-wide mandate, it's natural then that you would start looking to the people who did get 2,700 votes over 900 votes as your Chief Minister. But that in itself means, given that we know that St Helier, the elected representatives in St Helier are not getting their electors to turn out en masse, because, as I said, less than 30% of St Helier Central turned out to vote. And so, where that's happening, it's likely that your Chief Ministers are always going to come from the rural parishes, because in the rural parishes, where we managed to get nearly 50% of our electorate to turn out to vote, at least you'll be able to point to 2,700 votes, things like this, as opposed to 900 votes. And so it will become really important, I think, over time, that we don't have that island-wide mandate. And there will be, every time we have elections and we return to this Assembly, there will be nobody sitting in this Assembly who has a clear mandate to be the Chief Minister and to form the government. And I think that's going to be a massive problem. And, you know, and like I said, and I think it means that actually it's going to be very, very difficult for any St Helier deputy to be Chief Minister. When we have a situation, that goes particularly whilst we don't have a party system in the island. It would be covered, that issue would be covered off with a party system. But without the party system, with a principally independent system of members of the states, that's going to be a consistent problem. And it does mean, I think, into the future, constant votes of confidence, things like this, because there will always be this lack of a mandate. And it's for that reason, more than any other reason, that I'm voting for Deputy Miller's proposition. Because I can just see the system we have today causing a constant churn and effectively a constant level of disruption, if not chaos, in this assembly going forward. And I don't want that. I want some people to be elected and to be able to point to 15,000 votes, 12,000 votes, however many it may be, but it will be a significant proportion of the island. And they'll be able to say, look, Deputy Alves could stand as senator, get 15,000 votes, and she would be able to stand in this assembly and say, 15,000 people have voted for me. I have a claim, at least, for you to think of me as being chief minister. But Deputy Alves can't do that, in my opinion, with 900 votes. The only other way is the party system. But again, I know that I stand in a district that wants senators but doesn't want parties. And so, I'm really in that position where I think senators is the way forward, because if not, we have to change our system to a party system. And I know quite understandably, and it's understandable that people who represent St Helier, most of them being in reform, would want a party system, because it's unlikely, as much as I know, and I must say, I know that members of Reform Jersey campaign incredibly vigorously, enthusiastically, energetically, and they do their best to turn people out for elections. But it is really hard in St Helier, and I understand that. So this isn't a suggestion that they're not trying to get people to turn out. I know they are, but I think there will always be that problem. And why would you deny St Helier having the potential for a chief minister? Just because you don't want that island-wide mandate. I believe that without the island-wide mandate, if we continue down the system we have, it is less democratic. And this assembly is going to have problem after problem in choosing a chief minister for the future, because there will be no one with that mandate. Thank you, sir.
So would the deputy give way for point of clarification?
Would you, Deputy?
Absolutely.
Yes, point of clarification.
Okay. I did wait till the end on purpose so as not to... does the deputy accept that when pointing out how a candidate did in terms of percentage of the vote, so he said Deputy Alves got 16% of the vote, does he accept that it's not the overall vote that you need to count, it's actually how many voters there are, because every voter can only vote for Deputy Alves once, not 5 times, and they have 5 votes?
The deputy is absolutely correct, sir. That's why I pointed to 900 votes as the actual number of votes.
So, point of clarification, if I may, sir?
Yes, do you give way for a further point of clarification, Deputy?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So the deputy spoke about a St Helier deputy not having sufficient votes to be chief minister. Will he acknowledge that 3 independent deputies from St Helier have more votes than the current chief minister? Thank you, sir.
I acknowledge only from the perspective of I assume that the Connotab has checked that. I haven't checked that, so I cannot verify it, but I assume.
So, are you...
My light is on to speak.
On to speak, right, thank you very much. Deputy Moore.
Thank you, sir. I have been resisting the urge to stand up and speak in this debate. I think, firstly, Deputy Mezek spoke extremely eloquently at the outset and covered almost every single point that I would want to make in a most eloquent fashion. However, try as I might, I do feel prompted to speak, having heard Deputy Morel, and I have the greatest amount of time and respect for the deputy, and he did come second if we're going to look at the votes polled by each member of this assembly in the last election. He I believe was the second highest poll. But what matters is the action that we deliver when we're elected. And that's what really makes a difference to people's lives. We can talk as much as we want about changing a system and pleasing the traditionalists in our own constituencies. But actually, what we need to do is deliver what islanders want to see. They want to see us come up with solutions to the cost of living. They want to see us tackle building and delivering homes that families can see themselves bringing up their children in. They want us to bring forward policies that encourage businesses to assist young parents in finding childcare. They'd quite like to see the government itself, as the largest employer, deliver childcare to support its own employees, particularly those in working shifts in our health service and those probably in our education service as well, because those are the key things that a government delivers. So at the end of the day, most people in our island have many more votes than people in most other voting democratic nations of the world. In most places, a person has one vote. They go to the poll and they go with the understanding that they elect one person who goes to a parliament, takes part in that democratic role, and works together with people in a collaborative way, whether they're in a party or an independent or however their system may function. But it's that parliament that delivers action, and people accept the responsibility that their one vote contributes to the whole. So in our current system, which I do believe is actually working quite well, people have either 4 or 5 votes. They vote for their constable and they vote for either 3, 4 or 5 deputies. So actually some have 6. I believe at the last election we saw an improved level of debate in the constituencies at the parochial level amongst the deputies because, yes, as many have said today, and I apologise for going back and reconfirming this point, but of course our work covers the whole island. We all have to take into account the needs and the desires of our constituency, but also the whole island. That should be what motivates each and every single one of us, and I'm sure that it does. I actually believe that, and a point that I do not believe has been made so far in this debate, the current system is amplifying the role of the constable, because the constable sits proudly now at the head of their parish. And they have a very, very clear role in that parochial duty, a role that is now very different to that of a deputy, because I have to say, having served as a parish deputy, it was a most confused place. And as a non-member of the municipality, one struggles a bit to find that role of a deputy and to make it valuable and valued by their constituency members or their parish or their parishioners. And so, sir, I think, on balance, that given there is no difference between being a senator or a deputy once the election is over, that it's simply nothing but a vanity project. Without a specific role for a senator, I do believe, sir, that our islanders are well represented by us here. We are perfectly capable to make decisions on an island-wide basis, and actually, they are very tired of us talking about these issues, and they would simply like us to get on and move forward and not delay and actually deliver on what really makes a difference to everyday life. Thank you, sir.
Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'm nearly at the end of... I'm pleased to say what I've got to say on this. I've been campaigning for probably 14 years now, since the very start. And I do firmly believe that it is, well, it was certainly clear in the last elections in my district, the views of the electorate, that the reaction during and post the last election on this, and we might be only talking about the demographic that Constable of St John raised, but they are the demographic who are the most engaged in our democratic process. And we hope to encourage more young people. I know a lot of young people. I used to be one once. I've always been in support of the island-wide mandate, even when I was young, even when I was standing with Deputy Joseph and others back in the days of 1999. And I think many young people I speak to. Now, we mustn't patronise the electorate by saying it's going to be too difficult for you to choose a constable and 3 or 4 deputies and 9 senators. That's going to be too difficult for you, so we can't do it. And I find that a little bit patronising. So the office of senator was the most democratic of all the elected offices in Jersey and offered the greatest level of voter equity and accountability, in that senators are elected by and answerable to every voter and indeed every individual on the island. And the senatorial elections, sir, provided islanders with an opportunity to collectively discuss and consider key issues of interest to every person in Jersey, not just matters relating to their parish or their district. And that's what I found by speaking to many people now. So they miss being able to collectively discuss who they're going to vote for to represent them in the island-wide mandate. And of course, Deputy Kovac and others talked about the difference in roles. And I have been privileged to be both a deputy in a parish district and in the new constituency and a senator. And the roles are different. Importantly, the holders of senatorial office were therefore well placed to take unprejudiced and impartial views on issues affecting the whole island without being conflicted by parish or constituency pressures, providing, I think, the essential balance to the Assembly. Because let's be clear, let's be honest about it, the only way we're going to achieve absolute voter equality in this Assembly is by having all deputies. And that's a position that the Jersey Party have always been in favour of, but that is the direction. We cannot hover in this position. This is a halfway house. And so we have an option. We hover here. And I enjoy working in this Assembly. I think we've got a really good group of representatives. I'm honoured and privileged to lead the government. We have a productive government, and I hope we're going to come to the end of this term, so having achieved quite a lot of important issues, and hopefully we can start to rebuild public confidence. But it cannot stay, and it will not stay. There will be the constant pressure and debate for that total voter equality, or we can stay with a system that's right for our island, I believe, which has the balance of 3 types of states member, which has served us well and delivered prosperity to this island for many decades, sir. Deputy Gardner raised some valid points, sir. I don't think the diversity, the welcome improvement in diversity, and we've seen that improving gradually over the years, is down to the voting system. So, it's down, I believe, to the greater diversity in our community, with a broader cultural range, more women in office, more women in senior roles. We're working closely to make progress with gender pay gap and things like that. Our community is changing, and as a result, this Assembly is becoming more reflective of that community, and I welcome that, sir, and long may it continue. But I don't see how electing 9, giving every islander the opportunity to elect 9 members, sir, will impact upon that. I think, and I very much hope, and I think, and I believe we will continue to see improved diversity in this Assembly, sir. So I'm pleased this debate is coming to an end. It's been fairly divisive, but we all hold our beliefs for the right reason. I believe we're all here to make things better for islanders, sir. But I would just finish by reiterating that the island-wide mandate was and would be again the most democratic of all elected offices in Jersey, offers the greatest level of voter equity and accountability, the greatest level of democracy, and the senators are elected by and answerable to all the people of Jersey, sir, and I would be pleased to support the proposition. Thank you.
Very much, Chief Minister. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak on the proposition, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Miller to respond.
Thank you, sir. Sir, after what feels like a very long debate, I'm not going to try and address everybody's points. I think we have all heard what everybody's had to say. I will discuss some of the threads that have come up over the course of the entire debate over the last few days, because I suspect that there are very few people in this Assembly or online who have not already made their minds up. So I do have to say, however, I have been really quite disappointed by some of the tone and content of the debate today. I was surprised. I have had a huge volume of correspondence about this. All of those who've been supportive have written in very courteous terms, and the one or two who have objected have been very angry. Those online who have responded have been very angry, and I've seen that anger today, and I'm slightly surprised that this proposition should generate so much dismay and some of the language we've had today, and I'm not going to repeat it, but anyway, I'm just surprised by that. You know, it's a proposition like any other. So during the assisted dying debate, I had a bit of a wobble. I went into, in the run-up to it, I had thought, I will support assisted dying. And in the run-up to that debate, I spoke to a number of people, and a few people really made me consider where I was on it. And during the debate, I really was having a wobble as to whether I was going to support it or not. But then I remembered that at least twice during the election in Hustings, we'd been asked where we stood. And I had told people that I was, in principle, in favour of assisted dying. So I voted in favour of assisted dying, certainly Route 1, because that was what I told people, because I reflected that people would have voted for me, possibly, or not voted for me, because of what I said at the Hustings. And I had the actual privilege, because it was a very good course, to be at a CPA course last week, and one of the sessions we talked about had being an effective parliamentarian. And one of the things that we talked about was about authenticity and being true to your manifesto. And that's why I'm doing this. That's why I have brought this. Now, people have criticised, people who are not here have criticised that this has come back again. This is different from the previous propositions that have come forward in this term. And the reason we have spent so much time on it is because we've had 5 amendments, 3 of which have come from members of Reform who have been critical about the amount of time we're wasting. That's why we're wasting time, because we've had amendments. We could all just have voted on the proposition as it stood, but we've chosen to have amendments and to have to debate all those amendments. Party politics is still clearly in its infancy. There were 4 parties. Someone said there were 3 parties stood last time. There were 4. One was resoundingly defeated. One did quite well. One did very well. And the other 2, I think, returned 3 members. But I would suggest that we actually have 27 parties in this Assembly. We have Reform. We have Jersey Liberal Conservatives. And I excluded constables, for which I apologise if they're offended. We have all the independent members. We effectively stand on our own manifesto, and we are all entitled to promote our own manifesto. Deputy Mezek has been one of the critics. He has twice brought the same proposition this term. Deputy Taddy brought a proposition in December, which I believe he has brought in a previous sitting. Deputy Alves has lodged a proposition last week, which seems to be very similar to the one that was defeated in December. We will no doubt discuss that again. But we are all entitled, and I would say obliged, to continue to promote the issues that we think that our constituents tell us are of importance to them. Everybody's manifesto is valid, and we are all entitled and obliged to observe our manifestos. So just a few of the comments that's come up. Deputy Joseph criticised the senatorial mandate earlier in the week because people don't use all their votes. No, nor are they obliged to use all their votes. That is the point of free elections. People can vote for whoever they want. And if they look at a sheet of nine candidates, say they can vote for 4 people, and they have 9 candidates, they are not obliged to vote for people that either they don't know, or they don't think they trust, or that with whom they are not politically aligned. You are not required to vote for people except for the people you want to represent you. That's a key point about human rights and voting. You can do what you want. There are stories of candidates, in fact, suggesting to voters that they don't cast all the votes, that they vote perhaps for a couple of people and not for anybody else, because that will give those 2 people the greatest chance of success. I would suggest you could consider that to be quite undemocratic. Others would call it tactical voting. That is the nature of democracy. Whatever you think about it, I would not tell people not to cast all their votes. If you have 4 votes, you should use your 4 votes, as long as you have somebody that you think you can vote for, that you respect and you trust. Deputy Ferry, I think, was unfairly targeted today when he criticised. When he was talking about fairness, I believe he was talking about fairness in the eyes of the electorate, and how we do have large numbers of people who previously were using 10 or 11 or possibly 12 votes, who now have 3 or 5. Voter weighting, people just don't understand the theories of how many votes and what the electorate is. This proposal will give everybody 8 additional votes. People can choose from a wider pool. Some people have commented that they have felt unable to vote from the small selection in their district or from the political ideology of those standing. Now, that is a failure of our system. If we cannot field candidates that are politically diverse, that is a failure of the system. But the senatorial mandate will give people more choice. Deputy Moore just mentioned that in many jurisdictions people only have 1 vote. And that's true, they have 1 vote for the National Assembly, but they may vote for national councils, parish councils, any number of bodies within their countries. But as a constituent pointed out to me last night, what we have to remember is that in many places, when you cast your 1 vote, it almost doesn't matter who you vote for. You may not even like the candidate, but if that person is the Labour or the Conservative or the Green or the Liberal candidate or whatever party they stand for, you can be sure, or you can be fairly sure, never say never, that you know what you're getting and you know how that person would vote. In a system like ours, where it is entirely dependent on individuals and what they stand for and what they tell you they stand for, 1 vote is simply not enough. And, you know, as much as people would like to wish it into existence, we don't have that system yet, and we have to bear that in mind. Deputy Morell has talked about the numbers. Numbers can be cut any which way. We can look at numbers in all kinds of ways. But yes, I do agree with him. It's difficult to say how can it be truly satisfactory when we have members going in with almost 3,000 votes and members going in with little more than 600. You know, that's not right, but that is a feature of our system. That is a feature of our system, and it's a feature of how many people come out to vote. And while we are all very concerned about St Helier and underrepresentation of St Helier, I can't remember the number of the population of St Helier, whether it's 30,000, 36,000. If most of them don't come out to vote, that again is a problem for us as politicians. And listing reasons why people vote is not something that should make us not return the island-wide mandate. It should make us deeply concerned that people don't trust us or like us or think we will do a good job. And we have to change that. We have to get people out voting. And I don't believe that returning the island-wide mandate will stop people voting. Diversity in this assembly, yes, we do have the most diverse assembly that we've ever had. Perhaps that could be because we also have a very diverse community. The community looks different. When I walk around Jersey, I see a very different view than I saw 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago when I arrived. We have a diverse assembly because we have a diverse population, and that helps. If I could just make a couple of points of clarification. When I offered to the chair of PPC to help this morning, I was not offering to help the Law Draftsman with her drafting. I would not have that temerity to do so, even though I think I could dabble, but I would not dare threaten her, stand on her patch. But I repeat my offer to assist PPC with anything I can do with the workload if this proposition is successful. Further, I was not promoting the idea of a citizenship test. I was simply making the point that if we are going to look to Commonwealth models, there are Commonwealth models that are different and which offer different rules and regulations, and that we could look to other models. I also mentioned compulsory voting. Those were just bringing out what other jurisdictions do. I'm not suggesting we follow them, and equally, I'm not suggesting, as I did not suggest that we have to follow everybody else. Simply, there is a huge range of electoral practices across the Commonwealth. So, several people, including Deputy IE, took some delight, it felt, in criticising, as I predicted they would, the public meetings. But I confronted the issues with those meetings at the very start of my speech. I did not say thousands of people turned out. I was very clear that there was a vast difference of opinion, that people did have all sorts of ideas about what they wanted. But what was clear, there were, I calculate, because I went to all of them, over 150 people attended, another 30 or 40 have written to me. And no, I know that is not by any way statistically significant, but nor do I think it is appropriate to keep referring to a referendum that happened in 2013, which had a 26% turnout. And I applaud Deputy Mezek's seemingly encyclopedic knowledge of it. I wasn't that interested in politics at the time, although I believe I did participate in that referendum. But we cannot hang our hat on something that happened on 2013. Everything has changed since then. Huge parts of our population have changed. Our population has gone down, actually, I believe. So, no, they didn't include young people. I was clear about that. Any member here could have gone and consulted with young people, should they wish to do so. Evidence, it's sporadic, as I said. We don't have evidence of all sorts of things. We don't have all evidence of whether people want the bailiff to remain a speaker, whether they want people who are not citizens to stand for election. That doesn't stop us bringing forward propositions. And Deputy Alves talked about a report that was published in June 2023. I haven't read it, but if it was published in June 2023, I'm not quite clear what the period of the research was, because if our system had already changed in 2021, which I think was some 18 months before the election, then I'm slightly confused as to what people were responding to. Anyway, we don't. We know that there are some views, strong views on this. And I feel it is difficult not to recognise those views. Deputy Renniff, I will just say, when I brought the proposition, I had absolutely no intention of trying to diminish reform in any way. I have more respect for their abilities than that, and I have more confidence in everybody else's ability to stand against reform. So no, reform are not anywhere near my thinking in bringing this proposition. They are well capable of looking after themselves. So to conclude, as I said at a meeting relatively recently, when I stood for election, I did not have a particular axe to grind. When I made the decision to stand for election, I didn't have a particular pet project or hobby horse or objective that I wanted to achieve. I had concerns about the way long-term care was communicated, and I have been able to do something about that, and I'm proud of that. But my manifesto focused on 3 broad areas. But when I went out knocking on doors, and I have to say to Deputy Ward, we all knocked on doors, we all worked hard. You cannot get elected without putting in the legwork. I came from a standing start where I knew virtually nobody in St Lawrence or St John, or even Trinity, which I live, because I've lived a quiet life, and I've been too busy working at my very demanding jobs to go out and engage in parish events, for which I apologise, but I worked very hard. I'm not Trinity royalty or St John royalty or St Lawrence royalty. I don't have those centuries-old Jersey connections. I worked hard and I knocked on lots of doors, and very many of the people that spoke to me told me they were concerned about removing senators. And as I said, it wasn't the only point. It wasn't the only point. Nobody is pretending it's the only point. And this is not distracting anybody from the work of the day. If anybody's saying they haven't done anything for the last week because they've been preparing for this debate, then there's something very far wrong. But I know who voted for me, and I am very confident that a vast number of them want the island-wide mandate back. I put that in my manifesto, and I am going to stand good to my manifesto. I'm sure other people have commented on it in hustings, and it's to them. Everybody has to make their own decision. But I will be true to the people who I believe voted for me, who I believe wanted this. And it's got nothing to do with St Helier or the country parishes. It's about the people who voted for me want the island-wide mandate back. And if we don't support it, everybody will make their own decision. You have probably already made your own decision. But if we don't, we will have a large, significant section of our population who will continue to be distrustful, disengaged and feel disenfranchised. So I ask members to support this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Call for the appel.
Call for the appel.
Appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the main proposition. If members have had the opportunity of returning to their seats, then I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, if members have had the opportunity to vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been adopted by the required majority, 25 votes pour, 20 votes contre, 1 abstention.
So I confirm that nobody voted after the vote closed.
I beg your pardon?
I confirm that nobody voted after the vote closed online.
I'm sorry, Deputy. I mean, I gave an enormous amount of time. The greffier indicated that everyone had had the opportunity of casting their vote.
Yes, I agree. So I agree, but there is a vote that comes after that vote closed that they're notified online that is voting poor, and on such a close vote, I think we need to be very accurate on this vote.
Deputy, there was one vote, I'm informed there was one vote cast after it was closed in the chat, but that was not, it was a vote pour, but it was not counted in the total of 25. So
Thank you, sir. Could we have the names then, please, sir? All of them. Thank you. Sorry.
Yes, indeed.
Those members voting pour, the Connétable of St Helier, St Lawrence, St Brelard, Trinity, St Peter, St Mary and St Saviour, and Deputies Labby, Luce, Morel, Lahegara, Gorst, Farnham, Miles, Scott, Rose Binet, Miller, Tom Binet, Perry, Barbara Ward, Andrews, Gardner and Stevenson, and the Connétable of St Clement and St One. Those members voting contre, the Connétable of St John, and Deputies Southern, Tadier, Doublé, Ayer, Alves, Moore, Mesic, Osoph, Balash, Coles, Porray, War, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Kovac, Alex Curtis, Wilson, Renouf and Rob Ward. And the Conotable St Martin abstained.
Next item is the draft shipping Jersey Amendment Law. Yes.
So, may I propose the adjournment? I think if everybody's probably absolutely tired and in 15 minutes we can start again tomorrow.
I'm just getting going. But the adjournment has been proposed. Is that seconded? Oh, there we are.
May I ask, sir?
Yes.
May I kindly ask if the Chair of PPC has given consideration whether or not, because Friday is normally a day in which we get on with work, and would she consider asking any of the movers of the propositions they could move it to the next sitting? Kindly. But I'm just asking, sir, because we need to.
Chair of PPC.
Friday is always a day that we know that we have to attend the States in the States Week, so I think we have to carry on. Thank you.
Are members content to adjourn now?
Cool. No, sir.
No, sir.
No?
Appel, please, sir.
Appel's been appel has been asked for. To adjourn is pour and to continue is contre. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the chance of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Any remote votes? The proposal to adjourn has been adopted. 28 votes pour, 16 votes contre, and 1 abstention. Therefore, the Assembly is adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.